Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The October wind cut through the pines differently up here, carrying that sharp mountain cold that reminds you just how far from civilization you really are. I'd driven out to test some new gear I'd picked up over the summer, a lightweight hammock system, water purification tablets, the whole setup that outdoor magazines swear will change your life. My divorce had finalized 8 months earlier, right around my 37th birthday, and I'd been pouring money into hobbies ever since. The trailhead parking area had been empty except for my Subaru and an old pickup truck with rust eating through the wheel wells. 20 miles of dirt road between me and the nearest paved highway, another 40 to the closest town worth mentioning. Perfect conditions for what I needed. Absolute solitude to figure out if I could still handle being alone with myself. I'd made good progress that first day, pushing about 15 miles into the backcountry before setting up camp near a creek bend where the water ran clear over granite stones. The spot had everything: flat ground for the tent I'd brought as backup, trees spaced right for the hammock, fresh water nearby. I spent the afternoon organizing gear, taking notes on what worked and what didn't, feeling that satisfaction of self-sufficiency settling into my bones. Around sunset, I'd hiked a quarter-mile upstream to filter water for dinner and breakfast, leaving my camp to gather firewood on the way back. The freeze-dried pad thai actually tasted decent after a day of trail mix and jerky. I remember sitting by the fire, watching sparks rise into the darkness, thinking maybe I'd finally turned a corner on the whole starting over thing. The first sign happened when I went to hang my food bag. Every backpacker knows the drill: string it up high between trees, keep the bears from getting interested. I'd picked 2 pines about 30 feet from where I'd built the fire, and that's when I saw them. Boot prints in the soft dirt around my hammock setup, pressed deep like someone had stood there for a while. Not mine. I wear size 11 Merrells with a distinctive tread pattern I'd recognize anywhere. These were smaller, maybe size 9, with a heel pattern that looked almost military. The prints circled my entire camp area, pausing at my pack, my hammock, the spot where I'd stacked my firewood. My chest tightened as I followed the trail with my headlamp. Whoever made these had been here while I was upstream getting water, walking through my space, touching my things maybe, learning my setup. But the rocks were what really got under my skin. 3 of them, each about the size of a softball, arranged in a perfect triangle near the base of the tree where I'd leaned my trekking poles. They weren't randomly scattered. Someone had deliberately placed them there, points aligned precisely north-southeast. I found another arrangement 20 yards out, this time 4 rocks in a square with a 5th one dead center. Then another past that, and another. They formed a rough perimeter around my camp, maybe 8 or 9 of these little formations total. Some kind of marking system, had to be. I stood there in the dark, headlamp beam cutting through the trees, trying to convince myself that maybe day hikers had come through. Maybe it was some geocaching thing. Maybe anything except what my gut was screaming. That someone had been watching me set up camp, cataloging my equipment, and leaving these markers for a reason I didn't understand. I pulled out my phone, hoping for even 1 bar of signal to call for advice. Maybe check if there were any warnings about the area. Nothing. The screen showed emergency calls only, and even that was questionable this deep in the mountains. The nearest cell tower was probably 60 miles away. I spent the next hour breaking down the rock formations, scattering them into the underbrush, trying to reclaim some sense of control over the situation. Packed everything valuable into my sleeping area, rigged a few empty cans on paracord as makeshift alarms around the perimeter. The kind of thing that seems clever when you're desperate but probably wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted to get close. I lay in my hammock fully clothed, boots still on, knife clipped to my belt, telling myself I was overreacting. Sleep came in fragments, never deeper than that surface level where every sound jolts you awake. A branch cracking somewhere to the east, wind through the pines that sounded too rhythmic, too much like breathing. Around what my watch said was 2 in the morning, I heard something that made me sit up completely. A barred owl call, perfect in its execution, except barred owls don't live this far west. They're an eastern species. Their range stops hundreds of miles from here. I know birds. Spent 2 summers volunteering with the Audubon Society after college. Whoever made that call knew exactly what they were doing. Probably learned it from YouTube or one of those hunting apps. They were signaling to someone or testing if I'd respond, or just letting me know they were out there. The call came again 5 minutes later, closer this time, from the north side of my camp where the trees grew thicker. I slipped out of the hammock, moving as quietly as I could manage in hiking boots on dried pine needles. The knife felt pathetically small in my hand, a 4-inch folding blade meant for cutting rope and opening packages, not for whatever this was becoming. I crouched behind a thick Douglas fir and waited, controlling my breathing, listening for movement. Then came a coyote yip from the west, high and keening, except it had that same manufactured quality as the owl call. Too precise, too practiced. They were triangulating my position using animal sounds, probably 2 of them, maybe 3. Classic hunting technique. Use calls to communicate without seeming human. Make your prey think they're surrounded by wildlife instead of people. My mouth went dry as I realized how much planning this took. These weren't random hikers who'd stumbled onto my camp. They'd probably seen my car at the trailhead, followed me all day at a distance, waited for dark. The next sound made my decision for me. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, crunching through the understory about 40 yards south. Not trying to be silent anymore, wanting me to hear them approach, I grabbed my pack, left everything else, the hammock, the tent, the cooking gear, all of it, and started moving north, away from the footsteps, deeper into the forest. No headlamp, navigating by moonlight and memory, trying to put distance between myself and whatever sick game these people were playing. Behind me, I heard my camp alarm trip, the cans rattling against each other. Then silence. Then laughter, low and appreciative, like someone admiring a child's attempt at being clever. They weren't chasing me yet. They were going through my abandoned gear, learning more about me, deciding how this would go. I moved through the forest for what must have been an hour, staying near the creek for navigation but far enough away that the water noise wouldn't mask approaching footsteps. Every 50 yards or so I'd stop, crouch, listen. Nothing at first. Then maybe 30 minutes into my escape I heard it. A whistle, long and low, somewhere behind me to the east. An answering whistle came from the west, different pitch, different person. They were flanking me, keeping pace, letting me know they knew exactly where I was. The terror of it was how patient they were. No running, no shouting, just this steady, methodical pursuit. Like they'd done this before. Like they knew exactly how long it took for fear to break someone down, make them sloppy, make them fall or panic, or do something stupid that would end this little chase. My legs were burning by the time I reached a section of deadfall. Massive trees blown down in some old storm, creating a maze of trunk and branches 15 feet high in places. I crawled into the tangle, finding a hollow beneath 2 crossed logs where I could hide and catch my breath. Pulled out my phone again. Still nothing. Battery at 60%. I turned it off to save power, then remembered the GPS function would work without signal. Turned it back on, marked my location, tried to figure out the fastest route back to the trailhead. 20 miles of wilderness. But if I pushed hard, stayed off trail, maybe I could make it by noon. That's when I saw the text message notification. 1 bar of signal, barely registering. The message was from an unknown number, received an hour ago when I must have passed through a pocket of coverage. Nice gear, the hammock especially. We'll take good care of it after you're gone. My throat closed up. They had my phone number. They'd been close enough to see the brand of my hammock maybe while I was setting it up, thinking I was alone. Another whistle. Closer now. Maybe 200 yards. They were tightening the circle. Scrambled out of the deadfall and kept moving, following the creek downstream, knowing it would eventually lead to the valley where I'd parked. The moon was setting, darkness thickening under the canopy. I stumbled over roots, scraped my palms on bark, kept going. Then I heard something that changed everything, a dog barking, that deep, purposeful bay of a hunting hound catching scent. Of course they had dogs. This was their territory, their game. They probably lived in one of those little mountain towns, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and outsiders are tolerated only as long as they keep passing through. The barking got louder, more excited. The dog had found my trail from the camp. I had maybe 10 minutes before it caught up. No way to outrun a dog in this terrain, not with 15 miles still to cover. I made the choice that probably saved my life. Instead of running, I doubled back toward my abandoned camp, moving perpendicular to my original trail, wading through the creek to break the scent line. Let them think I was still fleeing north while I circled back. I found my camp destroyed, gear scattered and torn apart, my expensive hammock shredded into ribbons and hung from branches like party streamers. But they'd left my car keys. I'd hidden them separately in a zippered pocket they must have missed. I grabbed them and a water bottle, then heard voices approaching from the north. Casual conversation like they were on a morning hike. The dog was with them, leashed now, whining with frustration at losing the trail. I belly crawled into thick undergrowth and waited, breathing through my nose, watching their headlamps sweep the clearing. 3 of them, all men, dressed in hunting camo. One had a crossbow. They stood in my destroyed camp for maybe 5 minutes, discussing whether to wait for me to circle back or keep pushing north. The older one, gray beard visible in the lamplight, finally said I was probably smarter than the last one. Might make it interesting. They left heading northwest, taking their time, confident they'd pick up my trail again soon. I waited another 20 minutes after their voices faded, then started the most careful, quiet journey of my life. Stayed off the main trail, paralleling it through the brush, stopping every 100 yards to listen. The sky was starting to lighten in the east when I heard the dog again, baying excitedly from somewhere up the mountain. They'd found where I doubled back, realized my trick. But I had a 2-hour head start now, and desperation making me fast. I half ran, half stumbled those final 8 miles, branches tearing at my clothes, pack bouncing against my spine. Reached a ridge where I could see down into the valley, and there it was, the dirt road, my Subaru still parked alone at the trailhead. No other vehicles. They must have been dropped off, planning to take their time with me, maybe drive my car out themselves when they were done. I practically fell down the last slope, key already in my hand, threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Engine turned over on the first try. I drove those 20 miles of dirt road faster than was safe, fishtailing around curves, gravel pinging off the undercarriage. Made it to the highway as full daylight broke through the trees. Drove straight through to the state police station in the nearest real town, walked in looking like hell. Clothes torn, covered in dirt and dried sweat. The officer at the desk, a young woman with kind eyes, took one look at me and got her sergeant. I told them everything, showed them the text message, the photos I'd managed to take of the boot prints before deleting them in panic. They sent 2 units up to check the trailhead, found nothing but my destroyed gear scattered in the woods. No prints except mine, no trace of the men or the dog. The message on my phone had somehow deleted itself, showing nothing in my inbox. The sergeant suggested maybe I'd had a wildlife encounter, gotten spooked, torn up my own gear in the dark. Panic does strange things to people, he said. But he took my report anyway, filed it under suspicious activity. I never went back to get my gear, wrote it off as a loss, sold my camping equipment online the next month. Started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, though I never told her the whole truth, just said I'd had a bad experience hiking alone. 6 weeks later, I was grabbing coffee in town when I overheard 2 guys at the next table talking about some hiker who'd gone missing up in those same mountains. Different trailhead, they said, but same general area. They found his car but never found him. The search had been called off after a week. I left my coffee untouched, walked out on shaking legs, sat in my car for an hour trying to decide if I should go back to the police. But what would I tell them that I hadn't already said? That I'd overheard a conversation about a missing person in the same area where I'd claimed to be hunted? They already thought I'd imagined it all. I drove home, looked up the missing hiker online. His name was Robert, 43, recently divorced, had just gotten into solo backpacking. The parallels made me sick. I still check the news for missing hikers in that area, still jump when I hear whistling in public, still can't shake the feeling that somewhere in those mountains, those 3 men are preparing for the next one who thinks the wilderness is empty. The flyers were everywhere that Saturday morning in early June, when I stopped for coffee at the gas station near Cedar Ridge Park. A 7-year-old girl named Mia had wandered off from her family's campsite 3 days earlier, and the whole town had mobilized to find her. I'd just turned 31 that spring, no kids of my own yet, but seeing that little face with the gap-toothed smile made my chest tight. The volunteer coordinator at the fire station barely glanced at my driver's license before handing me an orange vest and assigning me to Search Team 4. We'd be covering the northeastern section of the forest, about 2 miles from where Mia was last seen. The team leader, a retired park ranger named Carl with weathered hands and kind eyes, explained that we'd spread out in a line, staying within voice range, and work our way systematically through the undergrowth. Our group was small, just 5 people including me. There was Carl, of course, then a married couple who ran the hardware store downtown, and a college kid home for summer break who kept checking his phone until Carl told him to save the battery. The forest was denser than I expected, with thick clusters of pine and oak that blocked most of the sunlight even at noon. We'd been searching for about 4 hours, calling Mia's name until our throats were raw, when the afternoon heat really started to press down. Carl had us take a water break near an old logging road, and that's when I heard it. Faint at first, almost lost in the rustle of leaves, but unmistakable once I focused on it. A child crying, high and desperate, coming from somewhere up the ridge to our right. I grabbed Carl's arm and pointed, but he was already on his radio, trying to raise the other teams to see if anyone else was hearing what we were hearing. The crying got louder, more urgent, and I couldn't just stand there anymore. I told Carl I was going to check it out, that it was maybe 200 yards up the slope at most. He shook his head, said protocol was to stay together, never split the team, but those sobs were tearing right through me. The hardware store couple, the Andersons, they heard it too, and the woman had tears in her eyes. Carl tried the radio again, but all he got was static, and the crying kept pulling at us, raw and terrified. I started moving toward the sound before I even realized I'd made the decision. Carl called after me to wait, that he'd go with me, but his knee had been giving him trouble all day and I was already scrambling up through the underbrush. I shouted back that I'd mark my path, that I'd yell if I found anything, and then I was pushing through a wall of mountain laurel, following those heartbreaking sounds. The ridge was steeper than it looked from below, covered in loose shale that kept sliding under my boots. I had to grab onto saplings and exposed roots to keep my balance, and twice I went down hard on my knees. The crying seemed to move, first ahead of me, then slightly to the left, like the child was wandering in circles. My volunteer vest kept snagging on thorns and low branches, and I could feel sweat running down my back, soaking through my shirt. About halfway up, I lost sight of the others completely, the forest swallowing even their voices. But the crying was clearer now, and mixed in with the sobs I could hear actual words, just fragments really, please and help, and what sounded like mommy. I pushed harder, my legs burning, thinking about that little girl alone out here for 3 days, probably dehydrated, definitely terrified, maybe hurt. The top of the ridge flattened out into a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by a thick wall of evergreens. In the center, partially hidden by tall grass, was a faded blue camping tent, the kind you'd buy at any sporting goods store. The crying was coming from inside it, muffled but steady, and I practically ran toward it, calling out Mia's name. My voice cracked on the second syllable, and suddenly the crying stopped. Complete silence, not even birds or insects, just my own ragged breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds waiting, then called out again, softer this time, saying it was okay, that I was here to help, that her parents were looking for her. Nothing. The tent didn't move, no response at all, and a cold weight started forming in my gut even though the afternoon sun was beating down on the back of my neck. I approached the tent slowly, noting how the grass around it had been trampled down in a rough circle, like someone had been walking around and around it. The zipper was partially open, maybe 6 inches, and through the gap I could see something dark inside. I reached for the zipper, announcing myself again, saying I was with the search party, that everything would be okay. My fingers were just touching the metal pull when I heard it again, the crying, but wrong somehow. It was coming from inside the tent, but had a tinny, hollow quality to it. I yanked the zipper down and stumbled backward when I saw what was inside. A small 2-way radio, the heavy-duty kind contractors use, sitting on top of a bunched-up sleeping bag. The crying was coming from its speaker, looping now that I was paying attention. The same sequence of sobs and pleas repeating every 40 seconds or so. A recording. Someone had recorded a child crying and was broadcasting it from this radio. My mind went blank for a moment, just complete static, because this didn't make any sense. Who would do this? Why would anyone set up a fake distress call during an actual search for a missing child? Then the implications hit me all at once, like ice water flooding my veins. This was bait. Someone had deliberately lured me up here, away from the group, to this isolated spot where no one could see or hear me. I spun around, scanning the tree line, and that's when I noticed the footprints. Fresh ones in the soft dirt, leading from behind the tent in a wide arc through the grass, disappearing into the trees directly behind where I was now standing. The prints came out of the forest, circled the tent several times, then headed back into the woods, but on the opposite side from where I'd approached. Whoever made them had been here recently, maybe even while I was climbing the ridge, and could very well still be watching from the shadows between the trees. I reached for my phone with numb fingers, but of course there was no signal this deep in the forest. The radio in the tent kept playing its horrible loop, and now that I knew it was fake, I could hear how the breathing patterns were too regular, how the words were spaced too evenly. I grabbed the radio, looking for an off switch, and found a folded piece of paper taped to its back. My name was written on it. Not my full name, just my first name, Jennifer, in careful block letters with black ink. Someone knew I would be the one to find this. Someone had been watching our search team, had seen me specifically, had counted on me being the one to break away from the group when I heard the crying. The paper was damp with condensation, and when I unfolded it, there was a single line written inside. You should have stayed with the others. A branch snapped somewhere behind me, not far, maybe 20 feet into the trees. I dropped the radio and it hit the ground, still playing that damned recording. Another snap, this one to my left, and I realized with perfect crystalline clarity that I was being herded. Whoever was out there wanted me to run in a specific direction, probably into another trap or toward a vehicle waiting on some old logging road. I thought about screaming for help, but Carl and the others were too far away, and it might provoke whoever was watching into acting faster. Instead, I did the only thing that made sense in that moment of pure panic and adrenaline. I ran straight back the way I'd come, crashing through the underbrush, skidding down the loose shale, not caring about the branches whipping across my face or the thorns tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I could hear pursuit, not running but walking steadily, deliberately, like they knew exactly where I was going and weren't worried about keeping up. Halfway down the ridge, my foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, rolling several feet before slamming into a fallen log. Pain shot through my ribs, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only lie there gasping while listening to those steady footsteps getting closer. That's when I heard Carl's voice, faint but unmistakable, calling my name from somewhere below. I screamed then, screamed his name and help, and someone's following me, all in one hysterical burst. The footsteps behind me stopped. I scrambled to my feet, clutching my side, and half ran, half fell the rest of the way down the slope until I could see orange vests through the trees. Carl was climbing toward me with the college kid right behind him, both of them wide-eyed and breathing hard. I collapsed into Carl's arms, babbling about the tent and the radio and the note with my name on it, and he held me steady while scanning the ridge above us. But there was nothing there. No movement, no sound except that faint, tinny crying still drifting down from the tent. The police found the tent exactly where I said it would be, the radio still broadcasting its loop until the battery died around sunset. They photographed everything, bagged the radio and the note as evidence, took castings of the footprints, but there were no fingerprints on anything except mine, no DNA evidence, no trail to follow once the footprints reached the rocky ground on the far side of the clearing. They questioned everyone on the search teams, checked if anyone had been filming or taking pictures that might have caught someone watching us. Nothing. The detective, a woman with tired eyes who'd been working the case since Mia first disappeared, told me the setup had probably been there for hours before we arrived, that whoever did it had likely been gone long before I reached the tent. But I knew better. I'd heard those footsteps following me down the ridge, measured and patient, like someone who'd done this before and would do it again. She didn't argue with me, just wrote everything down and said they'd increase patrols in the area. They found Mia 2 days later, thank God, alive and relatively unharmed, hiding in a drainage pipe about a mile from her family's campsite. She'd gotten turned around in the dark and had been too scared to come out when she heard people calling. The news should have made me feel better, should have closed the chapter on that horrible Saturday, but it didn't. Because whoever set that trap, whoever wrote my name on that paper and waited in the woods, they weren't connected to Mia's disappearance at all. They were just someone who saw an opportunity in the chaos of a search, someone who wanted to separate a volunteer from the safety of the group. I changed my phone number, varied my routes to work, installed new locks and a security system. But sometimes, especially when I'm alone and hear a child crying in a grocery store or playground, my whole body goes cold and I'm back on that ridge, reading those 5 words that still wake me up at night. I never volunteered for another search. My college roommate Lisa had been trying to drag me out of the city for weeks, and when she mentioned an overnight fishing trip along the Clearwater River, I finally gave in. Her cousin Paul supposedly knew every hidden spot worth fishing up there, claimed his grandfather had shown him places where catfish grew bigger than your arm. I packed my gear that Saturday morning, stuffing my dad's old tackle box into the trunk, even though I hadn't used it since high school. 2 hours north through winding mountain roads, we met at the ranger station parking lot. Paul already there, leaning against his truck with a map spread on the hood. He kept pointing at different bends in the river, explaining how the current changed with the season, how November brought the big ones closer to shore. We had maybe 2 hours before dusk to scout the perfect spot for our overnight setup. Paul led us down the main trail from the parking area, his voice carrying through the trees as he explained water temperatures and feeding patterns. My day pack bounced against my back, loaded with water bottles, energy bars, and the headlamp Lisa insisted I bring for the scouting walk. About a mile in, the trail branched into 3 directions, and Paul stopped, studying each path like he was reading something the rest of us couldn't see. He pointed left toward what he called the deep pools, told Lisa to check the middle path that followed the river's main channel, then nodded at a narrow track cutting right through the birch trees. He pulled a whistle from his pocket, pressed it into my hand, said to give 3 sharp blasts if I found anything promising. 45 minutes, he said. Then we'd meet back here to compare notes before setting up camp at the best location. The game trail wound through tall grass and young birch trees, narrow enough that branches kept catching my sleeves. I could hear the river somewhere to my left, that constant rush of water over rocks, but couldn't see it through the thick undergrowth. After about 10 minutes of walking, the path opened into a small clearing where someone had built a fire ring from river stones, probably fishermen from earlier in the season. The ashes inside looked old, weathered by rain, and pine needles had blown across everything. I kept going, ducking under low branches, and that's when I spotted Paul's water bottle sitting perfectly upright on a flat rock beside the trail. Not tossed or dropped, but placed there deliberately, the blue Nalgene bottle he'd been drinking from during the drive-up. I picked it up, confused, wondering how he'd gotten over here when I'd watched him head the opposite direction. I called out his name, waited for a response, but only heard the river and wind moving through the trees. The bottle was empty, the cap screwed on tight, and I noticed the rock had been cleared of leaves and debris, like someone had prepared that exact spot. I tucked the bottle into my pack, figuring Paul must have scouted this trail earlier, maybe yesterday or this morning before Lisa and I arrived. But something about the placement bothered me, too deliberate, too much like a marker or sign. The trail curved ahead, disappearing into denser forest, and I almost turned back right then, except I could see another clearing through the trees that might open onto the river. 5 more minutes, I told myself. Then I'd head back whether I found a good spot or not. The clearing turned out to be a false promise. Just another cluster of birch trees, but beyond it the trail started descending toward what had to be the river. That's where I found Lisa's baseball cap, the faded mariner's one she'd worn all day, hanging from a branch at exactly eye level. The branch had been bent down and twisted to hold it in place, deliberate enough that wind couldn't have done it. My chest tightened as I lifted the cap off the branch, turned it over in my hands. A few strands of her dark hair were still caught in the adjustment strap. I knew Lisa's path had run parallel to mine, maybe a quarter mile over, but there was no connecting trail I could see, no broken branches or footprints showing how the cap had traveled between paths. The sun was dropping faster now, throwing long shadows between the trees, and I pulled out my phone to check the time. No signal, which I'd expected, but I'd been walking for 25 minutes already. I should have blown the whistle then, should have turned around and jogged back to the meeting point, but I needed to understand what was happening. Lisa wouldn't have left her favorite cap, and Paul wouldn't have abandoned his water bottle, not when we'd need them for the overnight trip. I kept walking, slower now, scanning the ground and trees for any sign of my friends, for footprints or broken branches that might explain the items. The trail opened onto a narrow beach along the river, maybe 15 feet of rocky shore before the water started. Perfect spot for fishing, actually, with a deep pool where the current slowed and eddied back on itself. But what caught my attention were the fresh footprints in the sand, 2 sets walking along the water's edge, one larger, one smaller. Paul and Lisa had to be, except the tracks led in only one direction, heading downstream toward where the beach ended in a tangle of fallen trees. I followed the footprints, my boots crunching on the wet sand and river stones. They stayed close to the water, never deviating, never showing any sign of stopping or turning around. Where the beach narrowed, forcing me closer to the tree line, I found Paul's fishing vest draped over a piece of driftwood. The vest with all his gear, his lucky lures he'd been bragging about, the knife his grandfather had given him. Every pocket was still full, zipped closed, nothing taken. I grabbed the vest, slung it over my shoulder, and that's when I noticed the 3rd set of tracks. These came from the forest, larger boots with a deep tread pattern, and they followed behind Paul and Lisa's prints at maybe 10 feet back. The spacing was strange, irregular, like whoever made them kept stopping and starting, maintaining that exact distance. My mouth went dry as I traced the tracks with my eyes, saw how they never came closer, never fell farther behind, just shadowed my friend's path with mechanical precision. The light was failing now, that gray twilight that makes everything look flat and colorless. I pulled out my headlamp but didn't turn it on yet, not wanting to announce my position to whoever had left those tracks. The whistle was still in my pocket, but blowing it seemed pointless now, maybe even dangerous. I backtracked to where the 3rd set of prints emerged from the forest, found a narrow gap between 2 fallen logs where someone had pushed through. The bark was scuffed, fresh scratches in the wood, and there were broken twigs on the ground, stepped on deliberately to avoid making noise. I crawled through the gap, following the trail backward, trying to understand where this person had come from. The tracks led uphill, away from the river, weaving between trees with purpose. Then they stopped at a small rise that overlooked the beach, the spot where someone had stood watching, waiting. There were knee prints in the dirt where they'd crouched, and cigarette butts, 5 of them, ground out carefully and lined up in a row like they were keeping count of something. I stood there in the growing darkness, trying to piece together what I was seeing. Someone had watched Paul and Lisa from this spot, tracked them along the beach, but where were they now? The footprints on the beach had ended at the fallen trees with no return tracks, no sign of where anyone had gone. I turned to head back down to the river, and that's when I heard it. A branch snapping somewhere behind me, maybe 30 yards back in the direction I'd come from. Not the random crack of wood settling or an animal moving through, but the sharp, distinct sound of weight being placed wrong, then quickly shifted. I held my breath, stayed perfectly still, and heard nothing for 10, 20, 30 seconds. Then another step, careful this time, barely audible over the sound of the river below. Someone was following my exact path. Had probably been following since I'd found the water bottle, letting me collect the items they'd placed, watching me discover each piece of their setup. My mind raced through the options while my body stayed frozen. Run back to the cars, but that meant passing whoever was behind me. Continue downstream, but the tracks had led to a dead end. Hide and wait them out, but darkness was maybe 15 minutes away and they obviously knew these woods better than I did. I chose movement, stepping as quietly as possible down the slope toward the river, using trees for cover, trying to circle wide around where I'd heard the footsteps. Every few steps I'd pause, listen, and each time I stopped, the forest behind me would go silent too, like we were playing some horrible version of red light, green light. The pattern was too perfect, too controlled, and I realized this person wasn't just following, they were herding me, pushing me towards something specific. When I tried to veer left, back toward the main trail, a whistle came from that direction, 3 short blasts, the exact signal Paul had told us to use. But it wasn't Paul's whistle. The pitch was wrong, higher, and it came from the wrong direction entirely. The river was my only option now, the water loud enough to cover my movement, cold enough to break any scent trail if this person had dogs. I crashed through the last bit of undergrowth, not caring about noise anymore, and hit the beach running. My headlamp bounced in my pack as I sprinted along the rocky shore, following Paul and Lisa's tracks toward the fallen trees. Behind me, I heard whoever it was drop all pretense of stealth, heavy boots pounding down the slope I'd just descended. They were faster than me on familiar ground, and I could hear them gaining as I reached the log jam where the tracks ended. That's when I saw it. A blue tarp stretched between 2 trees just beyond the fallen logs, and underneath it, Paul and Lisa, sitting on the ground with their backs against a large boulder. They weren't moving, weren't responding to my shouts, and as I scrambled over the logs toward them, I saw why. Their hands were zip-tied behind their backs, duct tape across their mouths, and their eyes were wide with terror, looking not at me, but past me, at whoever was now climbing over the logs behind me. I grabbed the knife from Paul's vest, sliced through Lisa's zip ties first while she made frantic sounds through the tape. The footsteps behind me had stopped, and when I glanced back, I saw a man standing on top of the log pile, maybe 15 feet away. He was older, maybe 50, wearing hunting camo and a backpack, holding a camera with a long lens. Not pointing it at us, just holding it, watching. Lisa ripped the tape off her mouth, gasped something about him taking pictures of them all afternoon, following them from spot to spot, getting closer each time. I cut Paul free while keeping my eyes on the man, who still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just stood there like he was waiting for something. Paul grabbed his vest from me, pulled out a canister of bear spray he kept in the inner pocket, and that's when the man finally moved, not toward us but backward, disappearing over the logs into the growing darkness. We didn't wait to see if he'd come back, just ran upstream along the beach, scrambling over rocks and through shallow water until we found a deer trail that led back up toward the main path. The 3 of us made it back to the parking lot in under 20 minutes, running most of the way with our headlamps cutting wild arcs through the darkness. Paul's truck was still there, my car next to it, but there was a 3rd vehicle now, an old van with mud-covered plates parked at the far end. We didn't stop to investigate, just threw our gear in the trucks and peeled out of there, Paul leading the way with Lisa in his passenger seat while I followed close behind. We drove straight to the ranger station, but it was closed, dark, nobody around. The nearest police station was 40 minutes away in town, and by the time we got there and explained everything to the officer on duty, it was past 9 at night. They sent 2 units back to the trailhead with us, but the van was gone, no sign of anyone in the woods. The police took our statements, said they'd increase patrols in the area, but without a clear photo of the man or a license plate number, there wasn't much they could do. Lisa remembered seeing him earlier that day at the ranger station, pretending to study the trail maps while they were getting their fishing permits, and Paul said he'd noticed someone matching that description at the gas station where we'd stopped for supplies. We never went back to fish the Clearwater River, never even talked about trying again somewhere else. Lisa moved in with her sister in Portland a few months later, said she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched even in the city. Paul still goes fishing, but only in groups now, never alone, never in remote spots. The police called me once, about 6 weeks after that night, said they'd found an abandoned campsite deeper in the woods with dozens of photos tacked to trees, all of different people on trails, at beaches, setting up camp. None of us were in those photos, which somehow made it worse knowing we weren't the first, probably wouldn't be the last. I still think about that man sometimes, standing on those logs in the darkness, how he moved backward into the forest like he belonged there, like we were the intruders in his territory. I think about those 5 cigarette butts lined up in a row, and I wonder what he was counting, what signal he was waiting for, what would have happened if I'd arrived 5 minutes later, or not at all. Most folks around here inherit their first rifle the same way they inherit their grandfather's watch, passed down when you're old enough to understand its weight. Mine came wrapped in an old wool blanket on my 14th birthday, along with Dad's promise to take me out to the Carter's property once deer season rolled around. By the time I turned 23, we'd made that trip to Virginia every November like clockwork, just the 2 of us camping in that same clearing near the creek where Dad said he'd taken his first buck 40 years prior. That particular Saturday started out perfect, crisp autumn air, and not a cloud in sight. The kind of day where you can smell winter creeping in through the dried leaves. We'd driven down from Roanoke in Dad's pickup, the bed loaded with our gear and enough provisions for 3 days, though we both knew we'd probably head back Sunday night regardless of what we bagged. Setting up camp went like it always did, each of us falling into our roles without needing to speak much about it. Dad handled the fire pit while I strung up our food supplies between 2 oaks, high enough that the black bears wouldn't get interested. The Carters owned about 300 acres of prime hunting land, mostly dense forest, with a few natural clearings where the deer liked to graze at dawn and dusk. They lived up in Washington now, some government job that kept them busy year-round, but they let a handful of locals use the land during hunting season, as long as we kept to ourselves and didn't leave a mess. We'd seen their nephew once, maybe twice over the years, checking on the old cabin near the eastern boundary, but otherwise the place stayed empty from September through January. Dad always said that's what made it perfect, just wilderness and silence, no other hunters stumbling through your spot or scaring off the game. We spent the afternoon scouting, walking the trails we knew by heart, and checking for fresh signs. Found plenty of tracks near the water, droppings that couldn't have been more than a day old, and rubs on the saplings where the bucks had been marking their territory. Dad pointed out a scrape beneath a low-hanging pine branch, the earth torn up and musky with scent, said we should set up near there come evening. His knees weren't what they used to be, I could tell by the way he favored his right leg going uphill, though he'd never admit it out loud. We decided he'd take the stand we'd built 3 seasons back, about 15 feet up in a sturdy hickory with clear sightlines to the creek, while I'd position myself on the ground near a cluster of white pines about 70 yards east. The plan was simple enough. Wait for the golden hour when they'd come down to drink, take a clean shot if we got one, track it if necessary. By 5:30 we were in position, the forest settling into that peculiar quiet that comes before dusk. I had my rifle resting across my lap, safety on, breathing slow and steady the way Dad taught me, becoming part of the landscape. The temperature dropped fast once the sun started sinking behind the ridge, maybe 45 degrees, cold enough that my breath came out in little puffs that I tried to aim away from my scope. Every small sound seemed amplified in that stillness. A squirrel rustling through the leaves 20 yards away might as well have been an elephant. A woodpecker's distant hammering echoed like gunfire. Then I heard it. The snap of a branch followed by another, deliberate and heavy coming from the north. Through the gaps in the pine needles I caught movement, a flash of brown against the darkening forest. Then the full shape emerged into the small clearing ahead of me. 8-point buck, massive, probably 200 pounds if he was an ounce, walking with that careful grace they have when they're not quite sure about something. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, nostrils flaring, testing the wind, one ear swiveling toward where Dad sat in his stand. I clicked off the safety, trying to control the adrenaline surge that always came at moments like this, my finger hovering just outside the trigger guard. The buck took 3 more steps forward, turning broadside to me, the perfect shot presenting itself like a gift. I squeezed the trigger on an exhale, the rifle kicking back against my shoulder, the crack of the shot shattering the evening quiet. The buck jumped straight up, that telltale mule kick that meant I'd hit the vitals, then bolted into the trees heading southeast. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush, the sound growing fainter. Then nothing. Dad's whistle came from the stand, 2 short bursts that meant good shot. Wait 30 minutes before tracking. Those 30 minutes crawled by slower than any I could remember, sitting there in the growing darkness with my heart still racing. Dad climbed down from his stand and made his way over, clapping me on the shoulder, that proud smile visible even in the dim light. We went through the ritual of marking where I'd taken the shot, finding the first drops of blood on the leaves, bright red and frothy, which meant lung shot, a good clean kill. The blood trail was easy to follow at first, splattered on the dried ferns and oak leaves, leading us deeper into the woods along what seemed like an old game trail. Dad stayed behind me with the flashlight while I tracked, both of us moving quiet out of habit more than necessity. About 80 yards in, the trail opened into another small clearing, and I could make out the shape of the buck lying on its side near a fallen log. I remember feeling that mix of elation and respect you get when you take a life for food, already thinking about how we'd dress it and pack out the meat. But when I got within 10 feet of where the buck should have been, I stopped so sudden that Dad nearly walked into me. The deer was there, but it had been moved, dragged maybe 6 or 7 feet from where the blood trail ended, leaving these deep furrows in the dirt like something had grabbed it by the neck and pulled. The belly had been opened up, not with any tool I recognized the work of, but torn apart, the edges ragged like they'd been pulled rather than cut. Steam was still rising from the cavity in the cold air, which meant this had happened minutes ago, maybe while we were walking up. The intestines were gone, along with the liver and heart, but not scattered around like a coyote or bear would leave them. Just gone, taken. Dad's flashlight beam swept across the carcass, and I saw his face go rigid, that expression he got when something wasn't adding up right. Neither of us said anything for a moment, just stood there listening to the forest, which had gone completely silent, not even the usual insect noise you'd expect after dark. Dad grabbed my arm, not hard but firm enough to get my attention, and nodded toward the way we'd come. We started backing up, keeping our eyes on the trees around us, when I heard it, clear as if someone was standing right beside me, a voice that whispered, "That's mine," in this flat, wrong tone that made every hair on my neck stand straight up. The voice came from somewhere behind the fallen log, maybe 15 feet away, but when Dad swung his flashlight that direction, there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. We both had our rifles up now, safeties off, trying to cover different angles while moving backward toward the trail. Then we heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circling around us just outside the flashlight's reach, branches breaking with no attempt at stealth. Dad pulled out his phone. No signal, of course, we were too deep in the woods, but the screen light gave us a little more visibility. That's when I saw them, 2 eyes reflecting the light about 30 yards out, too high up to be a deer, too far apart to be anything that should have been in those woods. The circling stopped, and for maybe 10 seconds, everything went quiet again, except for our breathing. Dad whispered for me to stay close. We were going to move fast back to camp, forget the deer. Forget everything except getting out of there. We'd made it maybe 20 steps when something crashed through the underbrush to our left, big enough to shake the ground under our boots, and that voice came again. Closer this time, saying, "Mine, mine, mine," over and over in this monotone chant that didn't sound entirely human. Dad fired a warning shot into the air, the sound explosive in the darkness, and whatever was out there went silent. We ran then. I'm not ashamed to admit it. 2 grown men with rifles sprinting through the dark forest, like kids running from a nightmare. Branches tore at our clothes. I nearly went down twice, tripping over roots, but we kept moving, Dad's flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of us. Behind us, I could hear pursuit, not running but moving fast through the trees, keeping pace without seeming to exert effort. We burst into our campsite and Dad immediately went for the truck, throwing our rifles in the bed while I grabbed the essential gear, leaving everything else behind. The engine turned over on the third try, headlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate the trail out. As Dad threw it in reverse to turn around, something walked into the edge of the headlight beam, just for a second before stepping back into the shadows. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, walking upright but wrong somehow in its proportions. Arms too long, shoulders too narrow, and its face, God. Its face was almost human but stretched out, like someone had grabbed a normal face and pulled it forward. The mouth opened too wide, and even over the engine I heard it say "mine" one more time before Dad gunned it down the trail. We didn't stop driving until we hit the main road, didn't talk about what we'd seen until we were sitting in a well-lit diner 2 towns over, trying to make sense of something that didn't fit into any explanation we could accept. Dad called the Carters the next morning, told them we'd had to leave suddenly due to a family emergency, apologized for leaving some gear behind. They said they'd have their nephew check on it when he went down next month, make sure everything was all right. We never went back to get our stuff, never went back to hunt those woods again, and Dad sold his rifle the following spring, said he'd lost his taste for it. I kept mine but haven't used it since, just sits in the safe like some kind of reminder. We looked into the history of that land afterward, spent weeks going through old newspaper archives and county records, trying to find something that might explain what we encountered. Found a few missing persons cases from the 50s and 60s, hunters mostly, but nothing conclusive, nothing that gave us the answers we wanted. The only thing we discovered that made my skin prickle was an old property survey from 1892 that mentioned the eastern section of what became the Carter property was avoided by locals, something about it being claimed ground, though it didn't elaborate on what that meant. These days, Dad and I don't talk about that night unless we've had a few drinks, and even then we dance around the details, like saying it out loud might invite it back somehow. Sometimes I drive past the road that leads to the Carter property, always in daylight, never slowing down, and I wonder if it's still out there in those woods, waiting for the next hunter to take something it considers its own. I've thought about warning people, maybe posting something online about staying away from that area, but what would I say that wouldn't sound completely insane? That something in those woods claimed my deer and showed us its face? That it walked upright and spoke but wasn't human? No one would believe it. Hell, sometimes I barely believe it myself, except Dad was there too, saw the same thing, and that's the only reason I know I didn't lose my mind that night in Virginia. Picture 4 grown adults crammed into a break room that smells like burnt coffee and microwaved fish, avoiding eye contact while HR drones on about, fostering team cohesion after recent challenges. That was us 2 weeks ago, getting lectured because someone had filed a complaint about our department's toxic atmosphere, which, honestly, was putting it mildly, considering what had gone down between us over the past few months. Gregory from accounting suggested the hiking trip, said it would be good for us to get away from the office, from the fluorescent lights and passive-aggressive emails, and actually talk things through like normal human beings. I should have known better when he mentioned he'd found this perfect trail online, not too challenging, but remote enough that we'd have to rely on each other. His exact words, and I remember thinking that sounded more like a threat than a team-building exercise. Saturday morning came too fast, and there we were at the trailhead parking lot. Me, Gregory, Monica from procurement, and Jason, who'd just transferred from the Seattle branch 3 months ago and had the misfortune of landing right in the middle of our dysfunction. Monica kept checking her phone obsessively, even though we all knew there'd be no signal once we started climbing. Jason was doing this fake cheerful thing where he commented on literally everything like some kind of nature documentary narrator, and Gregory had this massive military-style backpack like we were summiting Everest, instead of doing a 2-day loop through state forest land. The official trail started nice enough, wide and well marked with those yellow blazes every 50 feet or so, and for about 2 hours we actually managed to maintain something resembling normal conversation, talking about anything except the investigation, the screenshots, the meeting where Monica had completely lost it and threw her coffee mug at the wall, narrowly missing Jason's head. Around noon, just when my feet were starting to complain and Jason had finally shut up about the native flora, Gregory stopped abruptly at what barely qualified as a fork in the trail. To the left, the yellow blazes continued, clearly marking the official path that curved gently upward. But to the right was this narrow deer track, or maybe an old logging road, barely visible through the undergrowth, disappearing into much denser forest. Gregory pulled out his phone, squinting at some hiking app he'd downloaded, claiming this unmarked path would cut 3 miles off our route and get us to the campsite with plenty of daylight to spare. Monica immediately started arguing that we should stick to the marked trail, her voice getting that sharp edge I recognized from budget meetings, while Jason tried to play peacemaker, suggesting we take a vote like this was some kind of democracy instead of a potential disaster waiting to happen. The thing about Gregory is, he has this way of making you feel stupid for disagreeing with him, like he's already thought through every possible objection and you're just too slow to catch up. He kept showing us his phone screen with the GPS overlay, insisting the shortcut connected back to the main trail in about 4 miles, that locals probably used it all the time, that we were being paranoid for no reason. Monica was the first to cave, probably because she didn't want to look weak in front of everyone. And once she agreed, Jason immediately fell in line, leaving me as the sole voice of reason that nobody wanted to hear. We stood there for maybe 10 minutes, the forest getting quieter around us like even the birds knew we were about to make a terrible decision, and finally I said fine, whatever. But if we got lost, it was on Gregory's head, which in retrospect was probably the stupidest thing I could have said given everything that happened next. The unmarked path started out deceptively easy, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, with occasional ribbons tied to branches that Gregory insisted were trail markers left by other hikers. But after about an hour, those ribbons disappeared completely, and the path kept splitting into smaller tracks that all looked identical, forcing us to rely entirely on Gregory's phone GPS, which he checked obsessively every few minutes, the battery icon in the corner showing a steadily declining percentage that nobody wanted to mention. The forest here was different too, older somehow, with these massive oak trees whose branches formed a canopy so thick that even in the middle of the afternoon it felt like twilight, and the undergrowth was this tangle of thorns and poison ivy that grabbed at our clothes and left angry red scratches on any exposed skin. By 3 in the afternoon, we'd been walking for 5 hours total, and Monica was starting to panic in that controlled way she had, where her voice stayed level, but her eyes darted around like a trapped animal. She kept asking Gregory if he was sure we were going the right way, and he kept saying yes, absolutely. Just another mile or so, but I could tell from the way he gripped his phone that he wasn't sure of anything anymore. Jason had gone completely quiet, which was somehow worse than his constant chatter, and every time we stopped to check the GPS or argue about which barely visible path to take, I noticed how the forest sounds would stop too. No birds, no insects. Just this oppressive silence that made our voices sound too loud, too human, too out of place in whatever part of the wilderness we'd stumbled into. The real argument started around 5, when Gregory's phone finally died, and we had to admit we were completely, utterly lost. Monica went from controlled panic to full-blown fury, screaming at Gregory that this was exactly like him, always thinking he knew better than everyone else. Just like with the Morrison account that he'd tanked because he wouldn't listen to anyone's input. Gregory shot back that at least he hadn't been stealing clients like she had, which made Jason nervously interject that we should focus on finding our way out instead of rehashing office drama. But that just redirected Monica's rage toward him, asking what he'd know about anything since he'd only been there 3 months and had already managed to sleep with half the support staff. The accusations flew back and forth, each more vicious than the last. Our professional facades completely shattered as we stood there in the growing darkness, and that's when I noticed it. Just at the edge of my vision, a flash of blue fabric moving between the trees about 30 yards away, there 1 second and gone the next. I tried to point it out, but they were too busy tearing into each other to listen. Monica now accusing Gregory of deliberately getting us lost as some kind of power play. Gregory calling her paranoid and unstable. Jason trying to physically get between them as their shouting match escalated into something that looked like it might turn physical. The blue fabric appeared again, closer this time, maybe 20 yards away, and I could make out that it was someone in a jacket, just standing there behind a thick pine tree, watching us. When I finally managed to shout loud enough to get their attention and pointed to where the person had been standing, there was nothing there, just empty forest, and they all looked at me like I was losing it, the stress finally getting to me. But I knew what I'd seen, and the way the hair on my neck was standing up told me we weren't alone out here, that someone had been following us, maybe since we'd left the marked trail, maybe longer. We decided to make camp right there, not because it was a good spot, but because it was getting dark and nobody could agree on which direction to try next. The clearing was barely big enough for our tents, surrounded by these twisted birch trees that looked like bones in the fading light, and we set up in angry silence, each person as far from the others as the small space would allow. Monica had brought one of those emergency whistles and kept blowing it every few minutes. 3 sharp blasts that echoed through the forest until Gregory told her to stop because she was giving him a headache, which started another argument about whose fault this was, who had the right to be angry, who should have known better. I kept watching the tree line while setting up my tent, looking for any sign of movement, that blue jacket, anything. But the forest had gone completely dark beyond our small circle of flashlight beams, and all I could see were shadows that might have been anything or nothing at all. Dinner was these dehydrated meal packets that tasted like cardboard soaked in salt water, eaten in hostile silence, broken only by the sound of Jason obsessively checking his dead phone like it might magically spring back to life. Around 9, Monica announced she was going to bed, zipping herself into her tent with enough force to nearly break the zipper, and Jason followed soon after, mumbling something about trying to get some rest so we could think clearly in the morning. That left me and Gregory sitting across from each other at the small camp stove, its blue flame the only light besides our dying flashlights, and he finally dropped his know-it-all act and admitted he had no idea where we were, that the GPS had been glitching even before the phone died, showing our location jumping around impossibly, sometimes putting us miles away from where we'd been seconds before. He said he'd noticed something else too, these old campsites along the unmarked trail, fire rings that looked recent but somehow wrong, like someone had been camping out here regularly, watching the trails, waiting for people stupid enough to wander off the marked paths. I barely slept that night, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sending adrenaline shooting through my system, and when I did drift off, I had these vivid dreams about being watched through the thin tent walls, shadows moving just outside, circling our camp like predators. When dawn finally broke, gray and misty, I crawled out to find Monica already up, standing at the edge of our clearing with her back to me, completely still. And when I called her name, she turned around with this blank expression and said, Jason's tent was empty, his sleeping bag still inside, but his backpack gone. We searched the immediate area, calling his name until our voices went hoarse, but there was no sign of him, no footprints leading away from camp, nothing except this sick feeling in my gut that whoever had been watching us yesterday had come back during the night, and Jason, always trying to avoid conflict, had probably gone with them willingly rather than wake us up and cause another scene. Gregory insisted Jason had just gone to find help on his own, too fed up with our bickering to wait for us to agree on a direction. But Monica found Jason's phone half buried in pine needles about 10 feet from his tent, and when she managed to get it powered on with her portable charger, there was a voice recording from 3:47 a.m. The audio was mostly static and wind, but underneath you could hear footsteps circling the camp, slow and deliberate, stopping occasionally right outside one of our tents. And then Jason's voice, barely a whisper, saying, "Hey, wait, what are you doing?" before the recording cut off. We played it 3 more times, each replay making it clearer that those footsteps had been there for at least 20 minutes before Jason noticed them, that whoever it was had been studying us, choosing, and the worst part was recognizing a sound in the background I hadn't noticed while sleeping. This low humming, almost like someone trying to remember a tune, getting closer and closer to Jason's tent until the recording ended. After the recording, we didn't need to discuss it. We just started packing, throwing everything into our bags with shaking fingers while constantly checking behind us, the forest suddenly feeling like it had eyes everywhere. Monica kept Jason's phone, Said we'd need it for evidence when we got out, if we got out. And nobody argued with the way her voice cracked on that last part. We picked a direction, any direction that seemed to lead downhill, and started walking fast, almost running, crashing through the underbrush without caring about the trail anymore, just needing to get away from that clearing, from whatever had taken Jason, from the feeling that we were being herded like cattle towards some predetermined end. Gregory was in the lead, using a broken branch to clear the path, when he suddenly stopped and pointed at something carved into a tree trunk, fresh cuts in the bark that looked maybe a day old, just 4 words that made my entire body go cold. "You chose this path." We found the marked trail 2 hours later, those beautiful yellow blazes appearing like salvation through the trees, and we practically ran the rest of the way back to the parking lot, not stopping even when Monica twisted her ankle on a root, just supporting her between us and pushing forward. The lot was empty except for our cars and one other vehicle I didn't remember from yesterday, an old green pickup with mud-caked plates, and we didn't stick around to investigate, just threw our gear in the trunks and got out of there. We called the police from the first gas station we found, reported Jason missing, gave them the GPS coordinates from Gregory's app history, played them the recording from Jason's phone, but when search and rescue went in the next day, they said they couldn't find our campsite. No sign anyone had been there at all, like the forest had swallowed up any trace of what happened. They kept searching for 3 weeks before calling it off, said Jason probably got disoriented and wandered off, maybe fell into a ravine. But Monica and Gregory and I know better. We know someone was out there with us, watching, waiting, taking, and the worst part is that we led Jason right to them. Delivered him gift-wrapped because we were too proud to admit Gregory's shortcut was a mistake. I quit my job the day after they called off the search. Couldn't stand being in that office knowing Jason's desk would stay empty, and I heard Monica and Gregory left soon after, the whole department basically imploding, which I guess was what HR wanted all along, just not like this, never like this. Montana in early May feels like the world just woke up from a long sleep, and that particular Saturday morning, I'd driven out to fish a section of the Bitterroot that most folks don't bother with anymore. Been fishing these waters since my college roommate introduced me to fly fishing back when we were both studying at Missoula, which makes it about 15 years now, give or take. The spot sits about 40 miles from any real town, down a dirt road that turns into barely a trail, then becomes nothing but deer paths through the pines. You have to want it bad enough to bushwhack the last quarter mile carrying all your gear, sliding down loose shale and pushing through serviceberry bushes that leave scratches on your waders. But the rainbow trout in that stretch of river make every scraped knuckle and thorn prick worth it, especially in spring when the snow melt brings them out hungry and careless. By noon, I'd already landed 3 decent rainbows, and lost what felt like a monster brown trout that snapped my tippet clean off near a submerged log. The sun was hitting that perfect angle where you can see straight through the water to the riverbed, all those smooth stones shifting between green and gold in the current. I was working my way upstream, casting into a deep pool where the main channel cuts hard against a granite cliff, when movement in my peripheral vision made me glance across to the opposite bank. Someone was standing in the shadows between 2 massive Douglas firs, maybe 60 feet away from me, just standing there, not moving, not fishing, not doing anything that made sense for a person to be doing in the middle of nowhere on a Saturday afternoon. At first I figured it had to be another angler scouting the water, maybe waiting for me to move on so he could fish the pool. We fishermen can be territorial about good spots. And I get it, especially when you've hiked that far in. I raised my hand in a friendly wave, the universal river greeting between anglers, but the guy didn't wave back, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge me at all. He just stood there, arms hanging loose at his sides, and that's when I noticed something was wrong with his clothes. They weren't clothes exactly, more like rags or maybe just a really old shirt and pants that had been through hell, all torn up and hanging weird on his frame. The color was all wrong too, this brownish gray that matched the mud along the riverbank, like he'd been rolling in it or living in it. I turned back to my fishing, telling myself to mind my own business, but every few casts I'd steal a glance across the river. The man never moved, not once, just kept watching from between those trees with his face half hidden in shadow. After about 10 minutes of this, I hooked into another rainbow, a real fighter that took line and jumped twice before I could work it into the shallows. The whole time I'm playing this fish, concentrating on keeping the right tension, working it away from a tangle of roots, I can feel eyes on me. When I finally got the trout in my net and looked up, the man had moved closer to the water's edge, maybe 30 feet away now, and that's when I saw he was barefoot. Not just barefoot, but his feet were caked in thick mud up past his ankles, and his toenails were long and yellowed, curling over the ends of his toes like they hadn't been cut in months or maybe years. The smart thing would have been to pack up and leave right then, but I'd driven 3 hours and hiked another 40 minutes to fish this spot, and some mud-covered weirdo wasn't going to run me off. Besides, the river was between us, running fast and cold with snowmelt, at least waist-deep in most places and deeper in the main channel. I released the rainbow and moved upstream to the next good run, where the water spreads out over a gravel bar before collecting into another deep pool. Cast after cast, I tried to focus on my technique, on reading the water, on anything except the fact that this guy was following me along the opposite bank, matching my pace perfectly. He moved through the thick underbrush without making a sound I could hear over the river, never stumbling, never pushing branches aside, just gliding between the trees like smoke. By the time I hooked my 6th fish of the day, a fat cutthroat that hit my dry fly right at the tail of a riffle, the man had positioned himself directly across from me again. The river was narrower here, maybe 40 feet wide, and I could see his face clearly for the first time. His hair was dark and matted down flat against his skull, streaked with what looked like algae or riverweed. His eyes were pale blue, almost white, and they tracked every movement I made as I brought the fish in. But it was his expression that made my chest tighten, completely blank, no emotion at all, like watching a mannequin that could walk. When I bent down to unhook the cutthroat, keeping it in the water while I worked the barbless hook free, I heard something that made me stop cold. A splash, not big, just the sound of something entering the water on the other side of the river. I looked up and the man was knee-deep in the current, walking straight toward me through the rushing water like it was nothing. The river that had me bracing against every step when I'd waded in, that would knock most people off their feet in the deeper sections, didn't seem to affect him at all. He moved forward steady and smooth, his eyes locked on mine, never blinking, never looking away even when the current pushed debris into his path. My cutthroat thrashed free and disappeared, while I stood there like an idiot, holding my rod in one hand and an empty net in the other, watching this muddy stranger wade through water that should have been sweeping him downstream. The closer he got, the more wrong everything about him looked. His skin had this grayish tint under all the dirt, and there were dark stains around his mouth and under his fingernails that could have been blood, or could have been something else. 20 feet away, 15, 10, and now I could smell him over the clean scent of the river. This thick, rotten odor like meat left in the sun, mixed with pond scum and human waste. I started backing up, slipping on the wet rocks, trying to keep distance between us while my mind screamed at me to run. But he kept coming, pushed through the deepest part of the channel where the water reached his chest, and his mouth opened for the first time, not to speak, but just hanging open like he'd forgotten how to close it. Inside, his teeth were brown and broken, some missing entirely, and his tongue was swollen and dark purple. When he was maybe 8 feet away, close enough that I could see bits of leaves and pine needles tangled in his beard, close enough that the smell made me gag, he stopped. Just stopped dead in the middle of the river and stared at me with those empty, pale eyes. We stood there for what felt like hours but was probably 30 seconds, him swaying slightly in the current with his mouth hanging open, me gripping my fly rod like it was some kind of weapon. Then his head tilted to one side, a slow, mechanical movement, and he raised one arm to point at my fishing vest. Not at me, specifically at the vest where I kept my caught fish in the inner pocket, the ones I was planning to take home for dinner. His finger stayed extended, shaking slightly, and then he made this sound, not quite a word, more like a wet gurgle from deep in his throat. He took another step forward, and I stumbled backwards so fast I fell, landing hard on my ass in the shallow water, cold river flooding into my waders. Scrambling to get up, I saw him bend down and pick something up from the riverbed. A dead trout that must have washed down from upstream. Probably been dead for days by the look of it. He brought the fish to his mouth and bit into it, scales, guts and all, tearing off chunks with those broken teeth while never taking his eyes off me. River water and fish blood ran down his chin, mixing with the mud and whatever else was caked on his face, and he chewed with his mouth open, making these horrible wet sounds. That broke whatever spell had been keeping me there. I turned and ran, or tried to run in waders filled with water, more like a desperate waddle toward the bank. Behind me I heard splashing, heavy and fast, and I knew he was coming after me. I made it to shore and crashed through the serviceberry bushes, branches tearing at my vest and hat, not caring about the trail or my rod or anything except getting away from whatever that thing wearing a human shape was. The quarter-mile back to my truck felt like 10 miles. I kept hearing things behind me, breaking branches, heavy footsteps, but every time I looked back there was nothing there, just empty forest. My waders were so full of water, they pulled at every step, and I ended up cutting them off with my pocket knife halfway up the slope, leaving $800 worth of Sims gear hanging from a pine branch. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, I almost cried from relief. I fumbled for my keys with numb fingers, dropped them twice before managing to unlock the door, and jumped inside. In the rearview mirror, just as I started the engine, I saw him standing at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still again, watching. He had something in his hand, another dead fish, or maybe the same one. Hard to tell from that distance. I drove out of there doing 40 on a road meant for maybe 15 miles per hour, bottoming out the truck twice and probably destroying my alignment. Didn't stop until I hit the gas station at the highway junction, where the kid working the counter took one look at me, soaking wet, covered in scratches, missing my waders, and asked if I needed him to call someone. I said no, bought a coffee with shaking hands, and sat in my truck for an hour trying to make sense of what had happened. Later, I did some asking around at the fly shop in town, careful not to sound too crazy, just mentioning I'd seen someone strange out by the river. The owner got quiet and said there'd been reports over the years, usually from solo fishermen, about a man living wild in those woods. Said he might have been someone who went missing from the state hospital 20 years back, or could be a veteran who never came home right from one of the wars, or maybe just some person who decided civilization wasn't for them anymore. Nobody knew for sure, and nobody wanted to find out bad enough to go looking. I never went back to that stretch of river, and I fish with a buddy now always. The trout aren't worth it, no matter how big they are or how hungry they're biting. The route I took that night was one I had never planned to use. My dispatcher had called in late, asking if I could deliver a load of industrial supplies to a small town near the Tennessee border. It was supposed to be a straight shot down the interstate, but a wreck ahead shut down the main highway. I pulled over at a gas station, talked to an old man who pointed out a shortcut through the Kentucky hills, narrow, twisting back roads with barely enough shoulder for a rig my size. It was late, past midnight, and the air had that thick, heavy stillness you get before dawn. I figured the quiet might help me make good time. The road wound deeper into the hills, past patches of forest that looked endless under the truck's high beams. I had the radio on low, some AM talk show fading in and out, when I saw movement near the ditch line ahead. My first thought was a deer, but then I noticed the shape. Small, human, kneeling. A woman, or at least I thought it was. Her hair hung forward, long and tangled, and she seemed to be crouched right at the edge where the forest met the road. I slowed down, leaned forward over the steering wheel, trying to make sense of it through the windshield. When my headlights washed fully over her, I realized she wasn't moving, just frozen there, hands on the ground like she was searching for something. Instinct kicked in. I eased the truck onto the gravel shoulder and killed the engine. The silence outside hit me hard. Only the low buzz of insects and the faint rustle of trees in the dark. I opened the door and called out, asking if she was hurt, if she needed help. No answer. She turned her head slowly, and for the briefest second, I caught her face. Pale, streaked with dirt, eyes wide and glassy like she didn't recognize where she was. Before I could take another step, she bolted. No scream, no sound of branches breaking, just the motion of her body vanishing between the trees. I shouted again, louder this time, but the forest swallowed the sound whole. I stood there for a while, scanning the tree line, my flashlight cutting through the dark. It was like she had dissolved into the woods. I thought about calling the sheriff's office right there, but I convinced myself she was probably scared or maybe high and didn't want to be found. I got back in the truck and drove off, uneasy but trying to shake it off as just another strange thing you see on the road. About an hour later, I stopped at a diner near a small crossroads town, just to clear my head. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, how she had turned without a word and vanished. The waitress noticed I looked uneasy, asked if I was okay. I told her what I'd seen, half expecting her to laugh it off, but she didn't. She said people around those hills talked about missing hikers, about folks who wandered off the road and were never found. Her tone wasn't dramatic, just quiet, like she'd heard it too many times before. That made me more unsettled than anything else. By the time I reached my drop-off, dawn had started breaking over the hills. The light was soft and hazy, and for a moment everything felt normal again. I parked, handed over the papers, and tried not to mention the woman. I figured maybe I'd just misread the whole thing. Maybe she was fine. But sleep didn't come easy later that morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face turning toward me, the way she seemed lost and hollow, as if she didn't belong in that place or that moment. When I woke up, I checked my phone. There was a local news alert about police activity along a county road not far from where I'd stopped the night before. The photo showed a stretch of road bordered by thick woods, the same spot. Curiosity got the better of me, and I drove back out there before heading home. 2 patrol cars and a white van were parked along the shoulder. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, tied between the trees. I didn't want to get in the way, but one of the deputies noticed me slowing down and waved me through cautiously. Later that evening, I read the article online. It said that early that morning, a jogger had reported what looked like drag marks leading from the ditch into the woods. Police had found a torn piece of fabric, red and frayed, caught on a branch nearby. They hadn't identified anyone or confirmed what had happened, but the picture that came with the story, the ditch, the tree line, the angle of the road, was exactly where I had seen her. That realization hit harder than I expected, and for a long time I just sat there staring at the screen, wondering if I should have done more, if maybe she was still out there when I drove away. I went back to work the next week, trying to focus on driving and not on what I might have witnessed. But every time I took a night route through rural areas, I caught myself scanning the edges of the road, half expecting to see someone there again. About a month later, I got assigned a run through the same county. I told myself it was just another job, that the odds of anything strange happening twice in the same place were slim. Still, as I got closer to those hills, my grip on the wheel tightened. The GPS voice echoed through the cab, and when it told me to turn onto that same narrow road, I almost ignored it. The forest looked different in daylight, calmer, ordinary. Birds cutting through the branches, wildflowers growing by the ditch. But the moment I passed the spot where I had stopped before, that calm broke. There were tire marks in the gravel, not fresh but clear enough to notice. And further down, a small wooden cross stood at the edge of the ditch. No name, no flowers, just a weathered cross with a strip of red cloth tied around it. The same shade I'd seen in the photo from the news article. I pulled over, stepped out, and walked closer. For a while I just stood there, not sure what I was feeling. Guilt, fear, or something in between. That night I parked my rig behind a rest stop a few miles from town. Couldn't sleep. Around 3 in the morning, a sound woke me. Something faint brushing against the trailer door. It wasn't wind. It came again, soft but deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down, scanning around the truck. The forest on both sides was still as glass. But then, near the edge of the trees, I caught movement. A figure, slight, crouched, turned away the instant the beam of light hit her. The shape, the hair, the way she moved. It was her. The same woman. I shouted out, but the sound barely carried before she slipped into the trees again, just like before. I didn't report it that time. I sat in my cab till sunrise, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. When daylight finally broke, I checked the ground by the trailer. Small footprints pressed into the dirt, leading back toward the forest. That was the last route I ever ran through that part of Kentucky. Sometimes I still take the interstate nearby, and when I do, I avoid looking toward those hills. But every now and then, if I drive through after dark, I swear I catch a glimpse of someone standing by the trees. Still, quiet, watching, and I never stop anymore. The forest roads around my town are quiet after dark, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound stand out. That night, I rode my motorcycle through one of those narrow dirt paths, headlight cutting through the fog, my breath fogging up the inside of my helmet. My friend Ethan had called me a couple of hours earlier. His dog, a black shepherd mix named Jasper, had bolted into the woods chasing a deer and never came back. He lived a few miles outside town, in one of those old houses surrounded by trees so dense they almost swallowed the light. I told him I'd meet him halfway, thinking we'd just find the dog tangled somewhere or scared under a tree. The air felt heavy that night, colder than usual for early autumn. Every few minutes I passed patches of mist that hung close to the ground, and the beam of my headlight caught flashes of something white. Just fog, I told myself. I kept the engine at a low hum, not wanting to scare Jasper if he was nearby. My phone was mounted on the handlebar, the GPS marking the trail that led toward Ethan's place. Around me, only the rhythmic growl of the bike and the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires filled the silence. About 20 minutes in, I slowed down near a bend where the trees pressed close on both sides. There was a faint sound, like a branch cracking somewhere behind me. I figured maybe it was just a deer, but it came again, sharper this time from the same spot. I stopped the bike, turned off the engine, and let the darkness close in around me. The silence after the engine died was so complete it almost rang in my ears. I took off my helmet and listened. For a few seconds, nothing. Then came the sound again, slow, deliberate steps through dry leaves, moving just beyond the edge of the headlight's reach. I called out Jasper's name, my voice sounding too loud in the still air. No response. I shone my phone flashlight toward the trees, and the light caught on something pale between the branches. Maybe bark, maybe not. Whatever it was, it shifted when I moved the light. I waited, heart thudding in my chest until the silence returned. That was enough for me. I started the bike again and gunned it down the trail toward Ethan's place, refusing to glance back even once. By the time I reached Ethan's driveway, the trees had thinned, and I could finally see the outline of his porch light through the haze. He came out before I even parked, flashlight in hand, his face tense. He said he'd heard barking earlier near the creek behind the house, but it stopped all at once. We decided to split up. He'd search the yard while I checked the tree line where the property ended. The woods looked different there, denser somehow, as if the trunks were standing closer than they should. My flashlight beam moved across them, catching bits of fog that twisted and disappeared in the light. A noise came from deeper inside, the same sharp crack of wood I'd heard before. I froze in place, listening again. This time, it wasn't just one sound. It was several, like something moving slowly, pushing through the brush, careful but massive. I called Ethan's name, but he didn't answer. My instinct screamed at me to move, but curiosity held me there just long enough to hear something breathe. Not panting like a dog, but long, uneven exhales that broke through the silence like someone forcing air through their throat. That's when I saw movement, tall, hunched, shifting just enough for my light to catch the edge of what looked like a shoulder. I backed away, nearly tripping over a root before running back toward the house. When I reached the porch, Ethan was standing there, still scanning the woods. I told him we should get inside, but he was sure it was just a deer. We argued quietly until Jasper's collar jingled somewhere in the dark, followed by a short bark that didn't sound right, too low, almost strained. Ethan's expression changed. He went down the steps, calling for his dog. I followed with the flashlight, though part of me didn't want to. We walked maybe 30 feet before the barking stopped again. Then everything went silent, except for the wind passing through the trees. We waited there for what felt like forever before heading back to the porch. Ethan locked the door behind us, still insisting it had to be an animal. We sat there for a while, both of us trying to listen for Jasper. I left shortly after, uneasy but pretending to be calm for his sake. The next day he called and said Jasper hadn't come back. He sounded different on the phone, quieter, like he hadn't slept. A few hours later he sent me a message saying he'd checked his security camera and there was something he wanted me to see. When I got to his house that evening, he had the footage paused on the living room TV. The camera was angled toward the porch, catching the faint glow from the single bulb above the steps. For a few seconds, it showed nothing but shadows and the edge of the woods in the background. Then something moved, slowly stepping into the light. It was tall enough that the top of its head almost touched the frame of the porch roof. Its shape was wrong, too thin, too long in the arms, as if it had been stretched. It paused under the light, and the moment the brightness touched it, the image flickered like static. When the screen cleared, it was gone. Ethan rewound it 3 times, his hands trembling slightly every time the thing appeared. There was no clear face, just a pale blur where one should be, and the way it stood. It looked aware of the camera, like it had stepped forward on purpose. The strangest part was the sound that followed. The microphone caught faint breathing, but not from the porch. It came from behind the camera inside the house. The recording ended abruptly when the porch light went out. I remember Ethan staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open, whispering that the light bulb had burnt out that same night. We went outside to check the porch anyway, even though every part of me wanted to leave. The bulb was intact, just unscrewed halfway, hanging loose in its socket. The woods beyond the yard were completely dark, no sound, no crickets, no wind, just that thick, unnatural stillness again. We didn't say much after that. I helped him screw the light back in, and when it flicked on, I could swear I saw something pale shift between the trees before disappearing into the dark again. A week later, Ethan moved out. He never told anyone where he went. The house is still there, but people in town say the light on the porch sometimes turns on by itself, even though no one's lived there for months. I have not gone back down that road since that night, but sometimes when I ride through the countryside after dark, I catch myself glancing at the tree line. Every time I do, I feel like something out there is already watching. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My sister Brooke and I had been driving since noon, crossing from Ohio into Kentucky on our way to visit our mom in Nashville. She had just gotten out of surgery, hip replacement, and we wanted to surprise her before the weekend. Brooke was 2 years older than me, the responsible one who always insisted on planning every detail of every trip. But that night, even she admitted we had pushed too far. The highway stretched endlessly through farmland and patches of dense forest, and by 11 at night, my eyes burned from staring at taillights and yellow lane markers. We had passed the last lit gas station about 40 minutes back, and the caffeine from my third gas station coffee had worn off somewhere around the state line. Brooke suggested we pull over at the next rest stop just for 20 minutes, stretch our legs and splash some water on our faces. I agreed without hesitation. My graduation from nursing school 2 years prior had taught me plenty about exhaustion, and I knew we were both running on fumes. The rest stop appeared like a mirage after another 15 miles of nothing but darkness and the occasional reflective deer eyes glinting from the tree line. A faded green sign announced it half a mile ahead, and I flicked on my turn signal more out of habit than necessity since we had not seen another car in at least 10 minutes. The parking lot was small, maybe 20 spaces total, with a squat brick building housing the restrooms at the far end. A single overhead lamp buzzed near the building entrance, casting a weak orange glow that barely reached the pavement below. Everything else sat in shadow. I pulled our Toyota Camry into a spot near the entrance, close to the restrooms, and that is when I noticed the only other vehicle there. A black SUV, something large like a Tahoe or Suburban, parked at the opposite end of the lot near the tree line. Every single window was tinted so dark I could not tell if anyone was inside. The engine was off, no lights, no movement. Brooke glanced at it and made a small sound in her throat, something between acknowledgement and unease, but neither of us said anything. We were too tired to read into things. Brooke grabbed her purse and opened the passenger door, and the night air hit us immediately, thick and humid with that earthy smell of summer in the south. Crickets screamed from the woods surrounding the rest stop, so loud it almost felt aggressive. I stepped out and stretched my back, feeling every vertebra pop after hours of hunching behind the wheel. The brick restroom building looked ancient, probably built sometime in the 70s and never updated since. Graffiti covered the walls near the entrance, crude drawings and phone numbers and the usual obscenities people carve into public spaces. A vending machine stood beside the women's door, its front panel cracked and dark, clearly out of order for months or maybe years. Brooke walked ahead of me, her sandals slapping against the concrete, and I followed a few steps behind. Neither of us looked back at the SUV. I told myself there was nothing unusual about another vehicle at a rest stop, even at this hour. Truckers pulled over all the time. Families on road trips stopped to let their kids use the bathroom. I was being paranoid because I was exhausted, and exhaustion makes everything feel threatening. That is what I kept repeating in my head as I pushed open the bathroom door. The inside of the restroom smelled like industrial cleaner, mixed with something sour underneath, like mildew that no amount of chemicals could fully mask. 2 of the 4 fluorescent lights overhead flickered in that erratic pattern that always makes me think of horror movies, and I actually laughed a little at myself for the thought. Brooke took the first stall while I went to the sink to splash cold water on my face. The mirror above the basin was scratched and clouded, and my reflection looked like a ghost of myself, pale and hollow-eyed. I cupped the water in my hands and pressed it against my cheeks, my forehead, the back of my neck. It helped a little. Brooke finished and came to wash her hands beside me, and we exchanged that silent look sisters share when neither wants to admit they feel uneasy. We dried our hands on paper towels that felt more like sandpaper and headed back toward the exit. That is when I heard it. An engine turning over, low and rumbling coming from somewhere in the parking lot. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, and the black SUV that had been parked at the far end of the lot was now moving. Slowly, deliberately, it rolled across the empty spaces toward our car. Brooke grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin hard enough to leave marks. We stood frozen in the doorway of the restroom, watching as the SUV crept forward with its headlights off. Just this massive black shape gliding through the darkness like a predator. It stopped directly behind our Camry, positioning itself so that its front bumper nearly touched our rear. The angle was precise, calculated, blocking our only clear path to the exit lane. My mind raced through explanations. Maybe the driver was just repositioning. Maybe they wanted to use the bathroom and preferred parking closer to the building. But nobody got out. The engine kept running, a low idle that seemed to pulse through the humid air. I could feel it more than hear it, this vibration that settled into my chest. Brooke whispered my name, just barely, and her voice cracked on the second syllable. I did not look at her because I could not take my eyes off that SUV, waiting for a door to open, for some explanation that would make this make sense. We started walking toward our car, trying to keep our pace normal, like nothing was wrong. My keys were already in my hand, and I pressed the unlock button twice, watching the Camry's lights flash in response. 20 feet felt like 100. The SUV just sat there, engine humming, windows so dark I could not see even the outline of a person inside. We reached our car, and I yanked the driver door open, practically throwing myself into the seat while Brooke scrambled in beside me. The second her door closed, I hit the lock button and jammed the key into the ignition. That is when someone knocked on my window. The sound was sharp, deliberate, knuckles against glass, and I jerked so hard my knee slammed into the steering column. A man stood beside my door, appearing from nowhere, or maybe he had been crouched beside the SUV the whole time. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie despite the heat, and his face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. He knocked again, softer this time, and then he spoke through the glass. His voice was muffled, but I could make out the words. He said his car would not start, said he needed a jump, asked if we had cables. Everything about this was wrong, and I knew it. His car was clearly running, the engine still rumbling behind us, blocking our exit. I shook my head through the window without rolling it down, mouthing the word, sorry, pretending I did not understand. The man tilted his head slightly, and even though I could not see his eyes clearly, I felt them on me. He knocked again, harder this time, and pointed toward the SUV with his other hand, gesturing for me to get out. Brooke had her phone in her hand, trying to call someone, anyone, but I could see the screen from the corner of my eye. No signal, not even one bar. These rural stretches of Kentucky were notorious for dead zones, and we had driven straight into one. The man kept talking, his voice rising just enough to sound insistent, and then I saw movement in my side mirror. Another figure, shorter but broader, walking around the back of our car from the passenger side. He moved slowly, casually, like someone out for an evening stroll, but his path was deliberate. He was circling, positioning himself at Brooke's door. I turned the key and the engine came to life, and I have never been more grateful for a sound in my entire life. The man at my window stepped back just slightly, surprised maybe, or recalculating. I threw the car into reverse without thinking, my foot pressing the gas before my brain fully processed what I was doing. The Camry lurched backward, and I heard the sickening crunch of plastic and metal as my bumper connected with the SUV behind us. But I did not stop. I kept reversing, turning the wheel hard, trying to angle around the massive vehicle blocking our path. The SUV moved with us. Whoever was inside matched my movements, inching backward as I reversed, keeping that gap closed. It was like they had done this before, like they knew exactly how to trap a smaller car in a parking lot with no witnesses. The man at my window started jogging alongside us, slapping his palm against the glass, and his voice changed. Gone was the pretense of needing help. He was yelling now, demanding we stop, using words I will not repeat. Brooke was screaming beside me, telling me to go, just go. And I was trying, God, I was trying, but there was nowhere to go. Then headlights appeared on the highway, a pair of them, bright and distant, coming from the direction we had arrived. I saw them through the trees first, flickering between the branches, and then they swung onto the exit ramp leading into the rest stop. The reaction was immediate. The man at my window stopped slapping the glass and turned toward the approaching vehicle. The SUV behind us suddenly lurched backward, creating a gap it had refused to give us seconds before. I did not hesitate. I slammed the car into drive and floored the accelerator, aiming for that narrow opening between the SUV and the concrete barrier marking the edge of the parking lot. The Camry scraped against something. I heard metal shrieking against metal, but I did not care. We shot forward, and I yanked the wheel toward the exit lane just as a semi-truck pulled into the rest stop, its air brakes hissing as it slowed down. The driver must have seen us tearing out of there because his horn blasted, long and deafening, echoing across the empty lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw the SUV reversing rapidly toward the tree line, pulling back into the shadows where it had been waiting when we first arrived. We did not stop until we reached the next town, a tiny cluster of buildings called Greenville or Greenfield, something like that, about 20 miles down the highway. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the kind with neon signs and truckers eating pie at the counter, and I put the car in park and just sat there. My entire body was shaking, this uncontrollable tremor that started in my legs and worked its way up through my chest and into my jaw. Brooke was crying silently beside me, tears streaming down her face while she clutched her phone like a lifeline. Neither of us spoke for what felt like 10 minutes. Finally, she looked at me and asked if that had really just happened, and I did not know how to answer her. The back of our car was destroyed, the bumper hanging off at an angle and deep scratches gouged into the trunk where we had scraped past the SUV. That was real. That was proof. We had not imagined anything. I wanted to call the police, but I did not even know where to begin. What would I say? 2 men in an SUV scared us at a rest stop? They never touched us. They never explicitly threatened us. All they did was ask for a jump and block our car. But we both knew what would have happened if that truck had not shown up when it did. We ended up calling the police from the diner after the waitress let us use their landline. A deputy showed up about 40 minutes later, a tired-looking man named Gentry, who listened to our story with the kind of expression that told me he had heard something like this before. He took notes, asked us to describe the SUV and the men as best we could, and told us he would file a report. When I asked if there had been other incidents at that rest stop, he paused for a moment before answering. He said there had been complaints, vague things, travelers reporting feeling unsafe or seeing suspicious vehicles, but nothing concrete, no arrests, no victims who stuck around long enough to press charges. He told us we were smart to keep our doors locked, smart to run when we did. The way he said it made me feel sick, like he was congratulating us on surviving something that should not happen in the first place. Before he left, he mentioned that the state had been talking about closing that rest stop for years due to budget cuts, that there was no staff after dark and no security cameras. Places like that attract a certain kind of person, he said. I think about those words more than I should. Brooke and I made it to Nashville the next morning, driving straight through the night because neither of us could stomach the thought of stopping again. We told our mom a shortened version of what happened, enough to explain why her 2 daughters showed up looking like they had not slept in days. She cried and held us, and made us promise to never travel that stretch of highway again after dark. I kept that promise for almost 2 years before work forced me to make a similar drive. That time I booked a hotel room halfway and paid extra for one near a police station. Some people might read this and think we overreacted, that maybe those men really did need help, and we just panicked. But I remember the way the SUV moved with us, inch by inch, refusing to let us leave. I remember the coordination between the man at my window and the one circling behind. I remember how fast they retreated the moment witnesses arrived. That was not a misunderstanding. That was a trap, practiced and patient, waiting in the dark for someone tired enough to stop. We were almost the ones who did not drive away. Every time I pass a rest stop now, even in broad daylight, I keep driving. I would rather run out of gas on the shoulder than pull into one of those places ever again. Friday nights usually meant overtime at the warehouse, and that November in 2014 was no different. My graduating class from high school back in 2005 had scattered across the country chasing careers and families, but I stayed in rural Ohio, working logistics for a distribution company outside of Columbus. The pay was decent, the hours were brutal during peak season, and by the time my shift ended at 2 in the morning, the roads between the warehouse and my apartment were completely deserted. I preferred it that way. No traffic, no headlights in my mirrors, just me and the hum of my old Ford pickup cutting through the darkness. That particular Friday had been exhausting. 14 hours of loading trucks and dealing with a computer system that kept crashing every 20 minutes. All I wanted was to get home, crack open a beer, and pass out on my couch with some late-night television droning in the background. I took my usual route, avoiding the interstate and sticking to the state highways that wound through farmland and patches of forest. The roads were empty, as expected, and a light fog had started creeping across the pavement in thin wisps. My headlights carved tunnels through the mist, illuminating nothing but asphalt and the occasional reflective mile marker. I had the radio tuned to some AM station playing old country songs, the kind my father used to listen to when I was a kid riding shotgun in his truck. Somewhere around mile marker 47, I decided to take a shortcut through an exit ramp that connected to a county road. It shaved about 10 minutes off my commute, and at that hour, every minute counted. I slowed down as I approached the curve of the ramp, my headlights sweeping across the guardrail and the tall grass beyond it. And that is when I saw something that made me ease off the gas pedal completely, my foot hovering over the brake as my brain struggled to process what my eyes were showing me. A baby car seat, right there in the middle of the exit ramp, sitting upright on the cracked asphalt like someone had placed it there with purpose. It was one of those infant carriers with the curved bottom and the handle arched over the top, the kind you see parents lugging around grocery stores and parking lots. The fabric looked pale in my headlights, maybe gray, maybe light blue, and there was a small blanket draped over it, partially covering whatever might be inside. I brought my truck to a complete stop about 30 feet away, my engine idling rough in the cold air. My first thought was that someone had been in an accident, that a car had gone off the road and I just could not see it from this angle. But there were no skid marks, no broken glass, no debris scattered across the pavement. The guardrail was intact. There was nothing, no vehicle, no person, no indication of how that car seat had ended up in the middle of a deserted exit ramp at 2:30 in the morning. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at that seat through my windshield, and every instinct in my body started screaming at me in two different directions. Part of me wanted to throw the truck in park, run out there and check if there was actually a baby inside that carrier. Because if there was, if some infant had been abandoned out here in the freezing November night, I could not just drive away. That is not the kind of person I am. But another part of me, a deeper and more primal part, was telling me that something about this whole situation was wrong. The placement was too deliberate. The exit ramp was too remote. I looked around, scanning the darkness beyond my headlights, and that is when I noticed the embankment on the right side of the road. Tall grass, dead and brown from the autumn frost, stretched up a slight hill toward a tree line about 50 yards away. And in that grass, barely visible in the ambient glow from my truck, I saw movement. Just a subtle shift, like someone or something adjusting their position. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I did not move. I just sat there, engine running, headlights pointed straight at that car seat, and I watched. The movement in the grass had stopped, but now that I knew where to look, I could make out a shape crouched low among the weeds. It was definitely a person. I could see the outline of shoulders, the curve of a head ducked down like they were trying to stay hidden. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I thought about honking my horn, about rolling down my window and yelling out to ask if someone needed help, but something kept me from doing it. Instead, I reached over to the passenger seat where I kept a heavy flashlight, one of those metal ones that took 4D batteries and could double as a weapon if needed. I grabbed it and pointed it toward the embankment without turning it on, just holding it, feeling its weight in my hand. The figure in the grass still was not moving. Whoever it was, they were waiting for me to get out of my truck. That realization hit me like a punch to the chest. This was a trap. The car seat, the empty road, the complete absence of any other vehicle or explanation. It was all designed to make someone stop, to make someone get out. I had heard stories like this before, urban legends passed around at work or shared on the internet. Tales of criminals using fake emergencies to lure good Samaritans into vulnerable positions. Carjackings, robberies, worse. I always figured those stories were exaggerated, the kind of paranoid warnings that bored people spread around to scare each other. But sitting there on that exit ramp, staring at a baby seat that had no business being there while a stranger hid in the brush 20 feet away, those stories did not feel like legends anymore. I slowly moved my foot from the brake to the gas pedal, keeping my eyes locked on the embankment. And then I saw a second shape rise slightly from the grass, further up the hill, closer to the tree line. There were at least two of them out there. My mouth went dry. I pressed the gas pedal gently, just enough to start rolling forward, and I angled my truck to go around the car seat on the left side where there was a gap between the carrier and the guardrail. I did not want to run it over. Some irrational part of my brain still wondered if there might actually be an infant inside, even though logic was screaming at me that this was all staged. As my truck crept forward, the first figure in the grass suddenly stood up. It was a man, tall and lean, wearing dark clothes and something covering the lower half of his face, like a bandana or a gaiter pulled up to his nose. He did not run toward me, did not yell, did not do anything dramatic. He just stood there and watched my truck roll past, his eyes catching the reflection of my headlights for just a second. That calm, patient stillness was more terrifying than if he had charged at my door. He looked like someone who had done this before, someone who knew that not every target would take the bait, and he was already calculating his next move. I cleared the car seat and punched the gas, my tires squealing against the cold pavement, as I accelerated down the rest of the exit ramp. In my rearview mirror, I saw the second figure emerge fully from the tree line. Shorter, stockier, moving quickly down the hill toward the road. The first man had turned to watch my truck disappear, and I could swear I saw him pull something from his pocket, maybe a phone, maybe something else. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and I did not slow down until I hit the county road and put at least 3 miles between me and that exit ramp. I was breathing hard, my chest heaving like I had just sprinted a mile, and the adrenaline was making my vision sharp and jittery at the same time. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights appear behind me, expecting to hear the roar of an engine closing the distance. But the road stayed dark and empty, and after a few minutes, I started to believe that I had actually gotten away. I did not go home. The thought of leading anyone back to my apartment, even if I was not being followed, made my skin prickle with unease. Instead, I drove straight to a gas station about 8 miles down the road, one of those 24-hour places with bright fluorescent lights and security cameras mounted on every corner. I pulled into a parking spot right in front of the entrance, killed my engine, and just sat there for a while, trying to calm down. My legs felt weak, like they would not support me if I tried to stand. An older woman working the night shift inside glanced at me through the window, probably wondering why some guy in a beat-up pickup was just sitting in her parking lot at 3 in the morning. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and called 911. I told the dispatcher everything: the car seat, the figures in the grass, the location of the exit ramp. She asked me if I had seen any weapons, if anyone had approached my vehicle, if I could describe the individuals in more detail. I answered as best I could, my voice still shaky, and she told me that officers would be dispatched to check the area. She also told me something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There had been 2 other reports that month from the same stretch of highway. One was a woman who had seen a similar setup on a different exit ramp about 5 miles north. A stroller that time, sitting in the middle of the road with a blanket draped over it. She had not stopped either, had driven straight to the nearest police station to report it. The other was a man who had actually pulled over to check on what he thought was an abandoned infant carrier. He had been jumped by 3 individuals before he even made it out of his car. Beaten badly, his wallet and phone stolen, his vehicle taken. The dispatcher said he had spent 4 days in the hospital with a fractured eye socket and broken ribs. She thanked me for reporting what I had seen and told me I had made the right choice by not stopping. I sat in that gas station parking lot for another hour after the call ended, watching every car that passed on the road, unable to shake the image of that tall man standing in the grass, watching me drive away with those calm, patient eyes. When I finally made it home that night, I locked every door and window in my apartment, wedged a chair under the front door handle, and sat on my couch with every light on until the sun came up. I did not sleep. I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that car seat sitting in the beam of my headlights, so perfectly placed, so deliberately staged. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I had gotten out of my truck, if I had walked over to check on what I thought was an abandoned baby, my back turned to the embankment, completely vulnerable. Would they have hit me from behind before I even knew they were coming? Would I have ended up like that other man, broken and bleeding on the side of a road that nobody traveled at night? Or would it have been worse? The dispatcher had mentioned robberies and carjackings, but she had not said those were the only things that happened in cases like this. She had left a lot unsaid, and my imagination filled in the gaps with possibilities I did not want to consider. The police called me back 2 days later. A detective named Holloway told me they had found the car seat still on the exit ramp when officers arrived, but whoever had been hiding in the grass was long gone. They recovered footprints in the mud along the embankment, at least 3 distinct sets confirming there had been more people out there than I had even seen. The car seat itself was empty, just a prop, purchased secondhand according to a faded tag still attached to the handle. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could identify who had set the trap. Holloway said they had increased patrols on that stretch of highway, but he was blunt with me. These kinds of operations were hard to catch because the people running them knew how to disappear fast. He told me I was lucky, that my instincts had probably saved my life that night. I thanked him and hung up, but the word lucky did not sit right with me. I did not feel lucky. I felt hunted. I changed my route to work after that, adding 20 extra minutes to my commute just to avoid that part of the highway. And even now, years later, I still slow down whenever I see something unexpected on the road at night. I still check the tree line, the ditches, the shadows beyond my headlights, because I know now that not every cry for help is real, and some traps are designed for people who just want to do the right thing. Nobody warns you about the silence. That particular kind of silence you only find on rural highways past midnight, where the road stretches like a black ribbon into nothing, and your headlights feel like the last source of light left in the world. I was driving from Portland to Boise that night, a 6-hour haul I had done maybe a dozen times before to visit my brother and his family. My daughter had just started kindergarten that fall, which meant I was officially part of that generation of adults who remember life before smartphones, but now cannot function without GPS. The clock on my dashboard read 1:47 in the morning, and I had been on the road since finishing my shift at the warehouse around 10. Coffee from a gas station 60 miles back was the only thing keeping my eyes open, and even that was starting to fail me. The man appeared in my headlights like a ghost rising from the asphalt. 1 second the road was empty, and the next, there he was, standing on the shoulder with his thumb out, and a large hiking backpack hanging from one shoulder. My first instinct was to keep driving, the way my father taught me, the way anyone with sense would do on a frozen highway in the middle of nowhere. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the temperature gauge reading 19 degrees outside. Maybe it was the fact that I had not seen another car in over 40 minutes, and knew he could freeze to death before anyone else came along. Maybe I just remembered being 23 and broke, hitching rides myself between college and my parents' house during winter breaks. Whatever the reason, I pulled onto the gravel shoulder about 50 feet past him, watching in my rearview mirror as he jogged toward my car, his breath forming thick clouds in the frozen air. He climbed into the passenger seat with a quick nod of thanks, pulling the heavy backpack onto his lap instead of tossing it in the back. I noticed that immediately. The bag was army green, covered in patches and pins, stuffed so full that the zipper looked ready to burst. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with a patchy beard that grew in uneven clumps across his jaw and cheeks. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray, and they darted around the interior of my car like he was cataloging every detail. He wore a brown corduroy jacket that was way too thin for this weather, and his fingernails were bitten down to raw pink crescents. The smell hit me next, not unwashed exactly, but something sharper underneath, like copper and sweat mixed together. I told him my name was Gary, asked where he was headed. He said east, just east, and that was good enough for now. His voice was flat, almost mechanical, like he was reading from a script he had memorized long ago. I pulled back onto the highway and tried to make small talk the way you do with strangers, asking about where he was coming from, what brought him out here in the middle of the night. He answered in fragments that never quite connected. Said he had been in Portland for a while, said he had business to handle. Said the buses stopped running when he needed them and that walking was fine until the temperature dropped. Every answer felt like a door closing rather than opening, so after a few minutes I stopped asking and let the silence fill the car. That was when he reached forward and turned off my radio without asking, killing the low hum of classic rock that had been my only company for the past 2 hours. The sudden quiet felt heavier than before, almost physical, pressing against my eardrums like a change in altitude. For about 20 miles neither of us spoke. I kept my eyes on the road, watching the white dashes disappear under my hood one after another, trying to calculate how long until the next town. My GPS showed a gas station in Huntington, still 43 miles ahead, and I started planning to stop there whether I needed fuel or not. Just to get out, breathe some fresh air, maybe give this guy a chance to find another ride. Then he laughed. Not at anything I said, not at anything on the road, just a sudden sharp burst of sound that came out of nowhere and stopped just as quickly. I glanced at him and he was staring straight ahead through the windshield, his lips moving slightly like he was having a conversation with someone I could not see. When he noticed me looking, he turned and smiled, and there was nothing behind that smile. No warmth, no humor, just teeth and stretched skin. He asked me if I believed in fate. I said I did not know. He said that was the wrong answer. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my life up until that point. He started talking, really talking, in this rapid stream of consciousness that jumped from topic to topic without any logic I could follow. He talked about a woman named Diane who had ruined his life, then about a dog he had as a kid that his father drowned in the bathtub, then about how the government was tracking people through cell phone towers, and that was why he never carried one. His voice would shift from a whisper to nearly shouting and back again within the same sentence. At one point he punched the dashboard hard enough to make me flinch, then immediately apologized with that same empty smile and said he just got excited sometimes. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over and tell him to get out. But we were in the middle of absolute nowhere, no lights visible in any direction, and something told me that stopping the car right now would be a very bad idea. He wanted to know why I had picked him up. I told him the truth, that it was cold, and I did not want him to freeze. He considered this for a long moment, tilting his head like a bird examining something shiny, then said that was a weak reason. Said most people who stopped for strangers at night were either looking for something or running from something. Asked which one I was. I said neither, that I was just driving to see my brother. He made a sound in his throat, something between a grunt and a laugh, then unzipped his backpack about halfway. I tried not to look, but I could not help it. Inside I saw clothes bundled into tight rolls, a flashlight, what looked like a bundle of zip ties, and the handle of something metallic catching the glow from my dashboard lights. He noticed me noticing and zipped it back up slowly, deliberately, holding eye contact the whole time. His pale eyes never blinked. He said he liked to be prepared for anything, said you never knew what kind of people you might meet on the road at night. The GPS announced that Huntington was now 26 miles away. 26 miles had never sounded so far in my entire life. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel and tried to keep my breathing steady, tried to act like I had not just seen what I saw. The man started asking about my route, why I was taking this highway instead of the interstate, whether I always drove this way. When I explained it was shorter and I knew the roads well, he shook his head and said I should take the next left, that he knew a faster way. There was no next left, not on this stretch. Nothing but empty fields and distant mountains for miles. I told him I would stick to my route, and his whole demeanor changed in an instant. The fake friendliness dropped away like a mask falling off, and underneath was something cold and rigid. He said he was not asking. His right hand drifted back toward the backpack on his lap, fingers brushing against the zipper. I have replayed the next few seconds in my head hundreds of times since that night, trying to understand how I managed to think so clearly when every cell in my body was screaming in pure terror. He unzipped the bag fully and pulled out a hunting knife with a serrated edge, the kind designed to gut deer, and held it casually against his thigh like it was the most natural thing in the world. He told me to stay calm, that nobody had to get hurt as long as I did exactly what he said. His voice had changed again, lower now, controlled, almost businesslike. He said there was a service road coming up in about 8 miles and I was going to take it. Said he had done this before and it always went smoother when people cooperated. I asked him what he wanted. Money, the car, anything he wanted he could have. He smiled again, that horrible empty smile, and said it was not about what he wanted. It was about what he needed. And what he needed was for me to stop asking questions and start driving where he told me to drive. My mind raced through every possible option. I could slam on the brakes, but he was already holding the knife and I would never get my seatbelt off before he reached me. I could try to crash the car, but at 70 miles per hour on a frozen road that was just as likely to kill me as him. I could try to fight, but he was younger and clearly prepared for resistance. Then I remembered something my father told me once about defensive driving, about how the person behind the wheel always has more control than they realize. I started slowing down gradually, just a few miles per hour at a time, watching the speedometer drop from 70 to 65 to 60. He did not notice at first, too busy scanning the darkness ahead for his service road. By the time we hit 55, I spotted what I had been praying for since he pulled out that knife. Headlights in my rearview mirror coming up fast, maybe half a mile back. Another car, the first one I had seen in over an hour. I made a decision right then that would either save my life or end it. I waited until the headlights were close enough that I could tell it was a truck, something big, 18 wheels maybe. Then I did 3 things in rapid succession. I slammed my hand down on the horn and held it there. I flicked my headlights from low to high beam over and over, and I started swerving across both lanes in a pattern that no sober driver would ever make. The man screamed at me to stop, lunging forward with the knife, but my swerving threw off his balance, and the blade caught the fabric of my jacket sleeve instead of my arm. The truck behind us responded exactly the way I hoped, laying on its own horn and flashing its lights, then pulling up alongside us in the oncoming lane. I could see the driver, a heavy-set man with a beard, his face twisted in confusion and concern as he tried to figure out what was happening. I pointed frantically at my passenger, mouthing the word help over and over, and I watched understanding dawn on the trucker's face. He grabbed something from his dashboard, a radio, and started talking into it while matching my speed. The man in my passenger seat went completely still, watching the truck with those pale, dead eyes, calculating his odds. Then he did something I did not expect. He started laughing, a high-pitched wheeze that sounded like air escaping from a punctured tire. He told me I was smarter than the others, said most people just did what they were told until it was too late. Then he reached over and pulled the door handle while we were still moving at 40 miles per hour. The door flew open, and the wind rushed in like a living thing, filling the car with noise and frozen air. He looked at me one last time, still smiling that terrible smile, and said he would remember my face. Then he tucked the knife back into his bag, clutched the backpack to his chest, and threw himself out of my moving car into the darkness beyond the shoulder. I slammed on the brakes so hard the anti-lock system screamed beneath my feet. The truck pulled over ahead of me and the driver came running back, asking if I was okay, saying he had already called the state police on his CB radio. I could not answer him. I just sat there behind the wheel, staring at the open passenger door swinging gently in the wind, my whole body shaking so hard I could hear my teeth rattling against each other. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they searched the area for over an hour with flashlights and dogs. They found nothing. No footprints in the frozen grass, no blood, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. The officer who took my statement said it was possible the man had a vehicle stashed nearby, that predators like that often planned escape routes in advance. He also told me that I was lucky, that 3 women had gone missing on this same stretch of highway over the past 2 years. They never found them. I made it to my brother's house by sunrise, and I have not driven that road at night ever again. Sometimes I still dream about those pale eyes watching me from the shoulder of some empty highway, thumb out, waiting for the next person kind enough to stop. Rural Kansas has a way of swallowing people whole, and I almost became one of its statistics on a Thursday night in early March of 2017. I had been driving for about 5 hours straight, heading back to Denver after a cousin's funeral in Topeka. One of those obligations where you barely knew the person, but your mom guilts you into showing up anyway. Everyone from my graduating class of 2012 was posting photos of their kids and promotions, while I sat in a church pew, pretending to remember a man I had met maybe 3 times in my entire life. The storm came out of nowhere, the way they do in that part of the country, turning the highway into a river, and the sky into something that looked almost solid. My windshield wipers were losing the battle, and every pair of headlights coming from the opposite direction felt like a threat. When the GPS suggested an alternate route to avoid reported flooding ahead, I took it without thinking twice. That was my first mistake. Exit 74 didn't even have a proper sign, just a metal post with reflectors that caught my headlights for half a second, before I was already committed to the turn. The road narrowed immediately, going from 2 lanes to something that felt more like a wide hiking trail. the kind of path that made my Subaru's suspension groan in protest with every pothole. According to my phone, I was driving through a town called Ridgeback, and the screen showed neat little house icons lining both sides of the road like a normal residential area. But when I squinted through the rain, all I saw was darkness. No porch lights, no glowing windows, no signs of life whatsoever. I figured maybe everyone had lost power because of the storm, which would make sense given how violent the weather had become. The thunder was so loud it vibrated through my chest, and lightning would occasionally illuminate the landscape in brief, harsh flashes. In those moments of brightness, I caught glimpses of empty fields and shapes that might have been structures, but looked wrong somehow, too angular, too skeletal. The first mailbox I passed made me slow down. It was standing there at the edge of the road, rusted and crooked, with the name Pemberton barely visible in faded paint. My GPS showed a house icon right where the mailbox stood, but behind it there was nothing. Just an empty lot filled with overgrown weeds and what looked like the concrete outline of a foundation, cracked and broken like old bones poking through dead skin. I told myself the house must have been demolished recently, that maybe the GPS data was outdated. But then I passed another mailbox and another, and each one stood guard over the same emptiness. Lots where homes should have been, some with nothing but charred remains, others with just flat dirt and scattered debris. One of them still had a child's bicycle lying in the grass, its frame twisted and orange with rust. And I remember thinking that no kid had touched that thing in years. The rain kept hammering my windshield, and my phone kept insisting I was surrounded by civilization. I pulled over near what the GPS claimed was an intersection, though in reality, it was just a T-junction where the gravel met an even rougher dirt path. My signal had dropped to 1 bar, and the map was taking forever to reload. I needed to figure out where I was and how to get back to the highway, because nothing about this place matched what my screen was showing me. That's when I noticed something strange about the silence. The rain was still falling hard, the thunder still rolling in the distance, but underneath all that noise there was an absence. No dogs barking, no generators humming, no sounds of life at all. I looked around through my rain-streaked windows and realized I couldn't see a single light anywhere. Not a farmhouse in the distance, not a radio tower blinking red. Nothing. Just absolute darkness pressing against my car from all sides like deep water. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but the call wouldn't connect. The screen just showed that spinning circle that means your phone is trying and failing to reach the outside world. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. At first, I felt relief. Another car meant another person, someone who knew these roads and could point me back toward the highway. The lights were far away, maybe half a mile, but they were getting closer. I watched them bounce and sway as the vehicle navigated the same terrible road I had just traveled, and I remember thinking I should flash my hazards to get their attention. But something made me hesitate. The car wasn't moving like someone just passing through. It was moving slowly, deliberately, like it was searching for something. Then another set of headlights appeared, this time from the dirt path ahead of me, coming from the direction the GPS wanted me to go. 2 vehicles approaching from opposite directions, both moving at that same strange crawling pace. My hand hovered over the gear shift, but I didn't know which way to run. The road behind me had those headlights blocking it, and the road ahead had the second car approaching. I was stuck at that T-junction like a mouse in a trap that had already snapped shut. The car behind me reached me first. It was a pickup truck, old and mud-caked, the kind of vehicle you see rusting in fields all across the Midwest. It stopped about 30 feet behind my Subaru, its headlights flooding my mirrors with harsh white light. I couldn't see the driver through the glare, just the silhouette of a figure sitting motionless behind the wheel. Then the car from ahead arrived, a dark sedan with a dented hood and no front license plate. It pulled up slowly and stopped about 20 feet in front of me, positioning itself at an angle that blocked any chance I had of squeezing past. For a long moment, nothing happened. The rain kept falling, the engines kept idling, and I sat there gripping my steering wheel so hard my knuckles went pale. Then, with a synchronization that felt rehearsed, both drivers opened their doors at the exact same time. I watched 2 figures step out into the rain, neither one making any move to approach me yet. They just stood there beside their vehicles, faces hidden in shadow, waiting for something I couldn't understand. A third door opened. I hadn't even noticed there was a passenger in the sedan until a woman climbed out from the back seat. She was tall and thin, wearing a raincoat that hung off her frame like wet paper, and she was the first one to move toward me. Her walk was casual, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. The two men, I could tell they were men now from their builds, stayed by their vehicles, watching. The woman stopped about 10 feet from my driver's side window and just stared at me through the rain. Lightning flashed, and for a split second I saw her face clearly. She looked ordinary, maybe in her 50s, with short gray hair plastered to her forehead and an expression that was completely blank. No anger, no threat, no emotion at all. That emptiness scared me more than anything else. She raised one hand slowly and made a cranking motion, telling me to roll down my window. I shook my head no and reached for my phone again, even though I knew it was useless. She watched me fumble with the device, and something close to amusement flickered across her face before it went blank again. The man from the pickup truck started walking toward me too. He was younger than the woman, maybe in his 30s, with broad shoulders and a thick beard that caught rainwater and held it. He positioned himself on the passenger side of my car, and now I had two people flanking me while the third man stayed by the sedan. My doors were locked. I had checked 3 times by this point, but that felt like such a pathetic defense against whatever was happening. The woman leaned closer to my window and said something I couldn't hear through the glass and the rain. I shook my head again, pointing at my ear like I didn't understand, which was true. She smiled then, just for a moment, and knocked on the glass with her knuckle. Not hard, not aggressive, just a polite little tap like she was visiting a neighbor. The bearded man mirrored her on the other side, tapping at the passenger window with the same casual rhythm. They were patient. They knew I had nowhere to go, and the way they looked at me through those rain-streaked windows made it clear they had done this before. I thought about my options while they stood there in the rain, watching me like I was a fish in a tank. I could try to ram one of the vehicles, but my Subaru wasn't built for that kind of impact, and their cars were positioned too precisely for me to get around them. I could honk my horn and hope someone heard, but there was no one to hear. That much was obvious. The woman knocked again, harder this time, and pointed at my door lock. The gesture was so matter-of-fact, like she was simply asking me to do something reasonable. The bearded man pulled something from his jacket, and in the flash of lightning, I saw it was a crowbar. He didn't raise it or threaten me with it. He just held it loosely at his side, letting me know it was there. That was when the reality of my situation hit me fully. These people weren't going to hurt me right away. They were going to wait. They would outlast me, drain my gas tank with the engine running, wait for my phone to die, wait for me to make a desperate move they could exploit. They had clearly done this enough times to know exactly how it went. Then I remembered something my dad had told me years ago, back when I was learning to drive. He was a paranoid man, my father. The kind of guy who kept a flashlight and a knife in every room of the house. He had made me promise that if I ever found myself in a situation where someone was trying to get me out of my car, I should never get out, but I should also never sit still. Movement was safety, stillness was death. My eyes flicked to the left side of the road, where the empty lot with the Pemberton mailbox sat in darkness. There was no fence, no barrier, just overgrown grass and mud. The pickup behind me was blocking the road, but it wasn't blocking that lot. If I could get my car across that patch of land, there might be a way around them. It was insane. My Subaru was all-wheel drive, sure, but it wasn't built for off-roading in a thunderstorm. But the alternative was sitting there until these people found a way inside. I made my decision in the span of a single heartbeat. I threw my car into drive and yanked the wheel hard to the left. The Subaru lurched forward and bounced off the gravel onto the muddy grass. I heard the woman shout something, the first real sound any of them had made. And in my rearview mirror, I saw her stumble back as my car swerved past her. The bearded man tried to grab at my door handle, but his fingers slipped on the wet metal, and then I was past him, tires spinning and throwing mud everywhere. The lot was rougher than I expected, full of hidden dips and debris buried under the weeds, and my car bucked like an animal trying to throw me off. I hit something hard, maybe a chunk of old foundation, maybe a rock. And my entire frame shuddered, but I kept my foot on the gas. The headlights from the pickup swung around as the driver realized what I was doing, but he was too slow. I cleared the lot and crashed through a line of dead bushes onto what looked like an old service road running parallel to the main path. I didn't know where it led. I didn't care. All that mattered was that I was moving, and they were behind me. I drove like a maniac for what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. The service road connected to another gravel path, which connected to a slightly better road, which eventually, mercifully, brought me to a state highway with actual lane markings and working streetlights. I pulled into the first gas station I found, a little 24-hour place with bright fluorescent lights and a bored teenager behind the counter, and I sat in the parking lot crying for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I bought a coffee I didn't drink and asked the kid if he knew anything about Ridgeback. He looked at me like I was crazy and said he had never heard of it. I went back to my car and checked my phone, 4 bars of signal now, and searched for the town online. What I found made my hands go numb. Ridgeback had been a real place once, a small farming community that had dried up in the 80s when the local industry collapsed. Most of the residents had left, but a few families had stayed behind, becoming increasingly isolated, and, according to one old news article I found, increasingly hostile to outsiders. There had been disappearances, investigations that went nowhere, rumors about people who drove through and never came out the other side. I filed a police report the next morning at a station 2 counties over. The officer who took my statement was polite but skeptical, the way cops get when they think you're wasting their time. He said he would look into it, but the way he said it told me nothing would come of it. A few weeks later, I got a call from a detective who asked me to describe the vehicles and the people again. He told me there had been other reports over the years. Travelers who had gotten lost near Ridgeback during storms, who had encountered people on the roads who tried to get them to stop. Most of those travelers had not been as lucky as me. He thanked me for the information and said the investigation was ongoing, but I never heard from him again. That was 8 years ago. I still drive for work sometimes, crossing through Kansas and Nebraska and the empty places in between. But I never take shortcuts anymore. I never trust the GPS when it tells me there's a faster way. And whenever I see an exit with no proper sign, just a metal post with faded reflectors, I keep my eyes on the road ahead, and I do not slow down. Every December, my sister Carolyn insists on hosting Christmas at her place in Raleigh, and every December I tell myself I should just fly instead of making the 7-hour drive from my apartment in Baltimore. But flights during the holidays cost more than my monthly rent, and besides, I actually enjoy the solitude of a long night drive, or at least I used to. That particular Friday, I left work around 8 in the evening, later than I wanted because a server migration at the IT company where I work decided to crash right before I clocked out. By the time I merged onto I-85 heading south, most of the traffic had thinned out, leaving me alone with the hum of my tires on asphalt and a podcast about unsolved disappearances that seemed fitting for the dark stretch ahead. My graduating class from high school had their 10-year reunion that summer, which I skipped, but it reminded me that time moves faster than we expect. Fast enough that a routine drive to see family can become something else entirely without any warning. The first 2 hours passed without incident. I stopped once at a gas station somewhere past Richmond, grabbed a large coffee and a bag of peanuts, stretched my legs in the cold air, and got back on the road. Virginia's highways at night have this particular emptiness to them, especially once you get past the suburbs and strip malls. The trees crowd close to the shoulder, their bare branches reaching toward the road like skeletal fingers, and the only light comes from your own headlights carving a tunnel through the darkness. I had the heat cranked up, my coffee wedged in the cup holder, and I was half listening to a story about a hiker who vanished in the Cascades when I first noticed headlights appear in my rearview mirror. At that hour, seeing another car was almost comforting. Proof that I was not the only person awake in this corridor of nothing. I remember glancing at the clock on my dashboard, 11:47. I remember thinking the other driver was probably just as tired as me, just as eager to reach wherever they were going. I had no idea that those headlights would become the only thing I could think about for the next 3 hours. At first, I did not pay much attention. Cars follow other cars on highways, that is how roads work. But after about 10 minutes, I noticed the headlights were unusually bright, the kind of aggressive high beams that people forget to switch off when they approach other vehicles. The light flooded my rearview mirror and bounced off my side mirrors, creating this blinding halo effect that made it difficult to see anything behind me, except white glare. I tilted my rearview mirror down to reduce the reflection, a trick my father taught me when I first learned to drive. That helped a little, but I could still feel the intensity of the light pressing against the back of my head, washing out everything in my peripheral vision. I figured the driver was either oblivious or inconsiderate, the type of person who cruises in the left lane with their high beams on, because they simply do not care about anyone else. I sped up slightly, hoping to put some distance between us and signal that they were too close. The car behind me sped up too. I eased off the gas, dropping from 75 to 65. The headlights maintained the exact same distance, close enough to swallow my entire rear window in light. That was when a small knot began to form in my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid, that highway driving at night can play tricks on your perception, that distances are hard to judge when the only reference points are your own headlights and the reflective lane markers blurring past. I switched lanes, moving from the left to the right, expecting the car to blow past me and disappear into the darkness ahead. It did not. The headlights drifted smoothly into my lane, settling back into position directly behind me like a magnet snapping into place. I could not make out the shape of the vehicle through the glare, just those two burning white eyes fixed on my mirror. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I turned off the podcast because suddenly the story about the missing hiker did not seem entertaining anymore. The silence in the car felt heavy, interrupted only by the drone of my engine and the rhythmic thump of tires crossing expansion joints in the pavement. I watched the mile markers crawl past. 147, 146, 145. The headlights never wavered, never fell back, never surged forward to pass. They just stayed there, locked onto me like I was the only thing on this road that mattered. I decided to test my theory. An exit sign appeared ahead. Exit 142, some town I had never heard of called Bracy. I flicked on my turn signal, watching the mirror carefully for any reaction. The car behind me did nothing. No signal, no movement to pass, just that unwavering wall of light. I began to merge toward the exit ramp, slowing down as the lane curved away from the interstate. For a moment, I felt relief wash through me. The headlights were continuing straight, staying on I-85, and I was about to prove to myself that I had been acting like a paranoid fool who had watched too many true crime documentaries. Then, at the last possible second, the car swerved onto the exit ramp behind me. No turn signal, no gradual merge, just a sharp cut across the painted lines that made my heart lurch into my throat. The tires on the other vehicle actually squealed against the asphalt. Whoever was driving had made a split-second decision to follow me, and they had done it with the kind of aggressive precision that left no room for coincidence. I was no longer on a highway with other potential witnesses. I was on a dark 2-lane road heading into rural Virginia, and the only other person out here had just made it very clear that wherever I went, they intended to go too. The road into Bracy was narrow and poorly lit, flanked by pine trees that blocked out whatever moonlight might have helped me see. My headlights caught glimpses of barbed wire fences and the occasional mailbox, but no houses close enough to the road for me to pull into a driveway and honk until someone came out. The car behind me had closed the distance. On the highway, they had maintained maybe 4 or 5 car lengths between us. Now it was 2 at most, close enough that the glare completely whited out my rearview mirror. I could feel the heat of their headlights on the back of my neck, or maybe I was imagining it, but the sensation was real enough to make me hunch forward in my seat. I fumbled for my phone with one hand, keeping my eyes locked on the winding road ahead. The screen lit up and I saw what I had been dreading. 1 bar of signal, flickering in and out like a dying heartbeat. I tried to call 911 anyway. The call failed before it even connected. I tried again, pressing the phone against my ear so hard it hurt. Nothing, just dead air and the glow of no service replacing my hope. The car behind me honked once, a long, sustained blast that echoed through the empty countryside like a warning shot. I pressed the accelerator harder, pushing my old Subaru Forester past 50 on a road that was probably meant for 35. The engine groaned in protest, but the speedometer climbed. 55. 60. The trees blurred into dark walls on either side of me, and I gripped the wheel with both hands, terrified of missing a curve and wrapping myself around a telephone pole. Behind me, the other car matched my speed effortlessly. When I accelerated, they accelerated. When I took a curve too fast and had to brake, they braked at the exact same moment, maintaining that suffocating distance like we were connected by an invisible tow cable. I started talking to myself out loud, something I do when I am scared and need to hear a human voice even if it is my own. Okay, think. There has to be a gas station, a store, something open. Just find lights, find people. But Bracy at midnight was a ghost town. The few buildings I passed were shuttered and dark. A closed hardware store, an abandoned feed supply warehouse, a church with no cars in the parking lot. I was alone with whoever was behind me, and they knew it. Then the road curved sharply to the left, and I saw a faint glow ahead, a fluorescent sign buzzing against the darkness. It was a small convenience store, the kind that sells cigarettes and lottery tickets and stays open late for truckers passing through. The parking lot was empty, except for one pickup truck near the entrance, probably belonging to whoever was working the register. I did not slow down to think about whether this was a good idea. I just yanked the wheel to the right and skidded into the parking lot, my tires spraying gravel as I came to a stop directly in front of the glass doors. I expected the car behind me to follow, to pull in beside me and reveal whoever had been hunting me for the past half hour. Instead, something worse happened. The car slowed as it approached the parking lot entrance, and for the first time, I got a partial look at it through my driver's side window. A dark pickup truck, maybe black or dark blue, with a lifted suspension and some kind of metal guard on the front bumper. It did not pull in, it just stopped at the edge of the lot, headlights still blazing, engine idling, waiting, watching. The driver did not get out, did not honk, did not do anything except sit there like a predator who had cornered its prey and was deciding what to do next. I threw open my door and ran inside the store, nearly tripping over my own feet as I pushed through the glass entrance. A bell chimed overhead, absurdly cheerful given the circumstances. The man behind the counter looked up from his phone with the tired expression of someone who had seen too many late-night weirdos to be surprised by anything. He was maybe 60 years old, with a gray beard that needed trimming and a faded camouflage jacket that suggested he spent his free time hunting deer rather than dealing with panicked strangers. "Someone is following me," I said, and my voice came out higher and faster than I intended. "There is a truck outside in the parking lot entrance. He has been chasing me since the highway. I need to call the police." The man, his name tag said Earl, leaned sideways to peer through the window behind me. His expression shifted from boredom to something harder, more alert. "Dark truck, lifted, got a brush guard on the front?" I nodded, unable to speak. Earl reached under the counter and pulled out a cordless phone, punching in numbers with practiced ease. "Yeah, this is Earl over at the quick stop on Route 58. Got a situation here. Some fella being chased by a truck. Vehicle is sitting at the edge of my lot right now, headlights on." He listened for a moment, then nodded. "Will do." Earl hung up and looked at me with an expression that was difficult to read, part concern, part something else I could not identify. "Sheriff's deputy is about 15 minutes out. Only one on duty tonight covering the whole county. You stay inside. Keep away from the windows." I moved toward the back of the store, positioning myself behind a shelf of motor oil and windshield wiper fluid, where I could still see the entrance but would not be visible from outside. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. Through the dusty glass, I watched the truck sitting at the edge of the parking lot, its headlights cutting two bright tunnels through the darkness. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Earl stayed behind his counter, occasionally glancing at the window, one hand resting near something under the register that I suspected was not a calculator. Neither of us spoke. The silence was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator cases and the distant ticking of a clock I could not see. Then, without warning, the truck's headlights flicked off. The engine revved once, a deep guttural sound that echoed across the empty lot, and the vehicle reversed slowly, deliberately, back onto Route 58. I watched its taillights disappear around a curve, swallowed by the night. But I did not feel relief. Whoever had been driving that truck had not given up. They had simply decided that tonight was not the night, that pursuing me further with a witness present and police on the way was not worth the risk. They had made a calculation, and that terrified me more than anything else. The deputy arrived 20 minutes later, a young woman named Faulkner with short brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel slightly safer just standing near her. I gave my statement twice, describing everything from the moment I first noticed the headlights on I-85 to the truck's deliberate retreat. She wrote it all down in a small notebook, asking clarifying questions without any hint of skepticism, which I appreciated more than I could express. When I finished, she closed the notebook and looked at me directly. "You are not the first person to report something like this on that stretch of highway," she said, and those words landed like a punch to the chest. "We have had 3 or 4 similar incidents over the past 2 years. Always late at night, always a lone driver, always that same general description of the vehicle. Dark pickup, lifted brush guard. We have never been able to identify the driver or catch them in the act." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "My advice? Do not drive that route alone at night anymore. Take the longer way through Durham next time, even if it adds an hour. And if you ever see those headlights again, do exactly what you did tonight. Find people, find lights, and call us immediately." I nodded, feeling numb. The idea that someone was out there, repeatedly doing this, picking off lone drivers like a sport, made me want to never get behind the wheel again. Earl let me stay at the store until I felt steady enough to drive. I called my sister around 2 in the morning, waking her up to explain why I would be arriving much later than planned. Carolyn wanted me to wait until daylight to finish the trip, but I could not stomach the thought of sitting in that parking lot for another 5 hours, jumping at every set of headlights that passed on the road outside. Deputy Faulkner offered to escort me back to I-85, and I accepted without hesitation. She followed me in her cruiser for about 30 miles, her presence a comforting glow in my rearview mirror, until she finally flashed her lights once and took an exit back toward Bracy. The rest of the drive to Raleigh was uneventful, but I kept my speed at exactly the limit, my eyes constantly flicking between the road ahead and the mirror behind me. I arrived at my sister's house just after 4 in the morning, exhausted and shaken in a way that coffee and sleep would not fix. That Christmas was subdued. I told Carolyn the whole story, and she made me promise to fly next year no matter what the tickets cost. I agreed. Some savings are not worth the price you might pay for them. February in Virginia means unpredictable weather, and that Sunday evening in 2017 had been deceptively calm when I left my friend Nora's place outside Raleigh. She had just had her first baby, a wrinkly little boy named Oliver who gripped my finger like his life depended on it. 4 days of holding him, helping with midnight feedings and pretending to enjoy her husband's overcooked pasta, had been the perfect escape from my cubicle life at the insurance office. My high school class graduated in 2009, and most of us were hitting that stage where babies and mortgages replaced bar nights and road trips. I had neither, just a used silver Nissan Altima, a cramped apartment, and a boss who expected me at my desk by 8 Monday morning. So I hit the road around 8 that night, a 6-hour drive ahead of me, trunk loaded with baby clothes Nora insisted I take for some future child I had no plans of having. The highway stretched out dark and familiar, a route I had driven dozens of times before. 3 hours in, somewhere past the North Carolina border, the world outside my windshield turned into pure blackness. No streetlights, no passing cars, no glowing signs of late-night diners or gas stations. Just my headlights cutting a narrow path through nothing. The moon had disappeared behind a thick layer of clouds, and the kind of darkness that surrounded me felt almost physical. like something pressing against the windows. My phone had lost signal about 20 minutes back, but that was normal for this stretch. It always came back near the next town. I was scanning through radio stations, catching bits of static and twangy country songs, when the steering wheel tugged hard to the right. Then came that awful sound, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump that meant only one thing. I gripped the wheel tighter and guided the limping car toward the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires as I slowed to a stop. The dashboard clock read 11:47, and I sat there for a moment in the sudden silence, my headlights illuminating nothing but empty road and scraggly trees. I popped the trunk and stepped out into the cold, immediately regretting that I had left my heavier jacket at Nora's. The air had that raw February bite, the kind that sneaks through fabric and settles into your bones. I walked to the back of the car, the crunch of gravel under my sneakers impossibly loud in the silence, and stared at the rear passenger tire. Completely deflated, the rim almost touching the ground. I had changed a tire exactly once in my life during a driver's ed class in high school, but I remembered the basics. Spare tire jack, lug wrench. I was pulling the spare from the trunk when I noticed headlights in the distance behind me, two small dots growing slowly larger. Out here, another car felt almost miraculous. I watched as the vehicle approached, expecting it to pass by, maybe slow down to see if I was okay. Instead, it pulled onto the shoulder about 30 feet behind my Altima, headlights blazing directly at me, and stopped. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The car just sat there, engine running, high beams washing everything in harsh white light that made me squint. Then the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. A man, tall and lanky, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He walked toward me with a pace that felt deliberate, not quite hurried but purposeful, his face obscured by the glare behind him. "Car trouble?" he called out when he was about 15 feet away, his voice friendly enough but cutting through the silence in a way that made my shoulders tense. I nodded, holding the spare tire like some kind of pathetic shield. "Flat tire," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and casual. "I got it though, thanks for stopping." He kept walking closer, and as he moved out of the direct beam of his headlights, I could finally see his face. Maybe mid-40s, stubbled jaw, deep-set eyes that caught the light strangely. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that seemed practiced, like something he had learned to do rather than felt. "Nonsense," he said, already reaching for the spare tire in my hands. "A lady shouldn't have to do this alone out here. Let me help." I did not want his help. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get back in my car, lock the doors, and wait for literally anyone else to come along. But there is this thing that happens to women, this awful programming that society drills into us, where we prioritize being polite over being safe. I did not want to seem rude, paranoid, or ungrateful. So I let him take the spare, let him crouch down by the flat tire, let him position the jack underneath the frame, even though his movements seemed oddly slow, like he was stretching the task on purpose. "Name's Gene," he said without looking up. "You picked a bad spot to break down. Nothing for miles out here." I told him my name was Michelle, which was a lie. My real name is Courtney, and thanked him again for stopping. He glanced up at me then, those deep-set eyes reflecting my taillights, and asked where I was headed. Something about the question felt wrong, too personal, but I mumbled something about visiting family up north. He nodded slowly, a small smile playing at his lips. "Long drive," he said, "all by yourself." The way he said it made the hair on my arm stand up despite the cold already doing that. I took a step back toward my driver's door, wanting to be closer to the interior of my car, to my purse where my useless phone sat, to anything familiar. Gene noticed. He stood up abruptly, abandoning the jack, and took a step that put him directly between me and my door. "Where are you going?" he asked, and his voice had shifted, still friendly on the surface but with something underneath, like a dog growling with its tail still wagging. "I just need to grab my flashlight," I said, the lie coming out shaky. He tilted his head, studying me in a way that felt like being dissected. "Headlights are bright enough," he said. "Why don't you come around here and hold this for me? Need someone to keep the lug nuts organized." He gestured toward the back of my car, toward the darkness beyond the reach of either vehicle's lights, I did not move. My legs felt rooted to the gravel, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Jean's smile faded slowly, like a mask slipping off, and for a long, horrible moment we just stood there staring at each other in the middle of nowhere. Then headlights appeared in the distance, coming from the opposite direction. Jean's head snapped toward them, and in that split second of distraction, I moved. I lunged for my car door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and hitting the lock button with my elbow. Jean was at the window immediately, his palm flat against the glass, that fake friendliness gone entirely now. His face had transformed into something cold and flat, his eyes empty in a way that made my whole body go rigid. "Open the door, Michelle," he said, using the fake name I had given him, his voice low and even. "You're being dramatic. I'm just trying to help you." I was fumbling for my keys, which I had stupidly left in the ignition, my fingers clumsy and uncooperative. The approaching car was getting closer, maybe a quarter mile away now. Jean looked at it, then back at me, and what I saw in his expression was calculation, pure, rational evaluation of his options. He slapped the window once, hard enough to make me flinch, then stepped back. He walked to my trunk, still open, and grabbed something. I could not see what from my angle. Then he moved to my rear tire, the one he had supposedly been fixing, and did something quick with his hands. I heard a metallic clang, the sound of the jack collapsing. He walked back toward his own car with an unhurried pace, like a man finishing a casual errand, and as he passed my window, he leaned down and looked directly at me. "See you down the road," he said, and I will never forget the way his mouth curved when he said it. Not a smile exactly, but something worse, something anticipatory. He got back in his car, a dark sedan I now noticed had no front license plate, and pulled back onto the highway heading the same direction I had been going. The other car passed by a few seconds later without slowing down, probably seeing nothing unusual about two vehicles on the shoulder. I sat there shaking, watching Jean's taillights disappear into the darkness ahead of me, realizing with growing horror that he was now somewhere on the road between me and home, waiting. I could not stay there, that much was clear. But I also could not drive forward on a destroyed tire, and going back the way I came meant hours of delay on unfamiliar roads with no cell signal. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I forced myself to breathe, to think. The jack was useless now, Jean had made sure of that, but maybe I could still put on the spare and limp to the next town. I sat in the car for another 5 minutes, watching for any sign of his headlights returning, before I worked up the courage to step back outside. The cold hit me like a slap. I moved fast, grabbing the lug wrench and crouching by the ruined tire. Jean had loosened the lug nuts but never actually removed them, and the jack lay crumpled on its side like he had kicked it. I tried to make it work anyway, pumping the lever with desperate energy, but the thing was bent beyond function. That was when I noticed something that made my stomach turn to ice. The flat tire had not blown out from road damage or wear. There was a clean slit in the sidewall, about 3 inches long. Deliberate. Surgical. He had done this to me, probably at the last gas station where I had stopped, while I was inside paying for coffee. The realization hit me in waves. He had been following me for miles, maybe since Raleigh, waiting for me to pull over, waiting for the tire he had slashed to finally give out. This was not a chance encounter. This was a hunt, and I was the target. I abandoned the tire and got back in my car, locking the doors again, my mind racing through options. I could try driving on the rim, but that would be slow and loud, and Jean would hear me coming from a mile away. I could wait for another car to pass, but the last one had not even slowed down, and who knew when the next would come. Then I remembered something. About 2 miles back, I had passed a small gravel turnoff with a metal gate and what looked like a farmhouse in the distance. Lights had been on. Someone was home. It was risky, walking 2 miles alone in the dark on a road where a predator might be circling back, but staying here felt like sitting in a trap waiting to be sprung. I grabbed my phone, useless as it was, and the small canister of pepper spray I kept in my glove compartment. Then I turned off my headlights, plunging myself into complete darkness, and slipped out of the car as quietly as I could. Walking along the edge of that highway was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I stayed off the pavement, moving through the rough grass and gravel on the shoulder, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness until I could make out the faint shapes of trees and fence posts. Every sound made me want to scream. The rustle of wind through dead leaves, the distant call of some night bird, the crunch of my own footsteps that seemed impossibly loud. Twice I saw headlights in the distance and threw myself flat into the ditch beside the road, pressing my face into cold mud and dead weeds, my heart slamming against my ribs. The first car passed without incident, heading the opposite direction. The second one came from behind me, moving slowly, and I recognized the shape of it even before I could make out details. The dark sedan with no front plate. Gene was circling back. I lay there in the ditch, not breathing, as his headlights swept over the spot where I had been walking seconds before. He was going maybe 10 miles an hour, searching. I could hear the low rumble of his engine as he crept past, and I squeezed the pepper spray so tight I thought it might crack in my grip. He continued on toward my abandoned car, and I did not wait to see what he would do when he found it empty. I ran. Not on the road, but through the fields beside it, stumbling over uneven ground, tripping on roots and rocks I could not see. The farmhouse appeared as a faint yellow glow in the distance, and I fixed my eyes on it like a lighthouse. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I did not stop, not even when I heard a car engine revving somewhere behind me, not even when I tore my jacket on a barbed wire fence I barely saw in time to climb instead of run into. I reached the farmhouse porch and pounded on the door with both fists, gasping, probably looking absolutely insane. An older man answered, maybe 65, wearing a flannel robe and an expression of total bewilderment. I told him someone was following me, that I needed to call 911, and something in my face must have convinced him, because he pulled me inside without a single question and locked the door behind me. His wife appeared from the kitchen holding a phone, already dialing. Through the window I saw headlights slow down on the main road near the gravel turnoff, pause for a long moment, and then accelerate away into the night. The police came within 15 minutes. The couple, Bernard and June Whitfield, stayed with me the entire time. June pressing a mug of hot tea into my hands that I could not drink because my whole body was still trembling. Officers found my car where I had left it, trunk open, tire slashed, the sabotage jack still lying on the ground. They took pictures, took my statement, and exchanged glances that told me this was not the first time they had heard something like this. A detective called me 2 days later with news that made me sick to my stomach. The dark sedan had been found abandoned in a motel parking lot about 40 miles north, wiped clean of prints. It had been reported stolen 3 weeks earlier from a dealership in South Carolina. There was no Gene, at least not by that name, and no way to trace him. But here is the part that haunts me. The part I think about every time I drive alone at night. The detective told me they had pulled security footage from the gas station where I had stopped for coffee, the last place before my tire went flat. The footage showed a man matching my description walking calmly to my car while I was inside, crouching by the rear tire for less than 30 seconds, then returning to a dark sedan parked on the far side of the lot. He had been following me since Raleigh, maybe longer, and the detective said something I will never forget. He said in cases like this, when they catch the person, they almost always find out it was not the first time. Gene is still out there somewhere, and I know with absolute certainty that I was not his first, and I was not his last. I just happened to be the one who got away. The stretch of highway we'd been on for hours felt almost hypnotic, the kind of monotony that makes every conversation fade into background noise. I was driving my old sedan because it handled long trips better than either of my friends' cars, and we were trying to make it across 3 states in one weekend to visit another buddy who'd moved away. The sun had dipped low enough that the sky looked bruised, that in-between color where everything feels a little out of sync. I remember thinking how strange the evening felt, quiet in a way that made the world seem hollowed out. When the detour sign appeared up ahead, bright orange and angled slightly toward the shoulder, it didn't look suspicious at first. It matched the style of official signs I'd seen before, right down to the reflective striping. My friend Lucas leaned forward between the seats and tapped the dashboard. Yeah, makes sense. They were supposed to repave this section this month. That comment alone made the decision feel normal. I slowed down, clicked the blinker, and followed the arrow pointing us off the main road. The turn led us onto a thinner stretch of pavement lined with tall trees, thick enough that the branches tangled above us and dimmed what little light was left. My friend Haley joked that it felt like we were driving into a tunnel someone carved out with a pocket knife. She laughed afterward, but it was the kind of laugh that's too sharp, too quick, like she was trying to shoo away a thought she didn't want to sit with. The road after the first mile started to look neglected, a patchwork of faded paint lines and broken asphalt. No houses, no farms, not even old billboards, just a long ribbon of cracked pavement swallowing us whole. Every few seconds I checked the mirrors out of habit, half expecting to see another set of headlights or even a reflector post. But there was nothing. The deeper we went, the more wrong the route felt. Lucas asked if we should turn around, and I remember telling him we'd do it at the next wide shoulder, but none ever showed up. It was as if the road had been designed without a single place to pull off, like some kind of one-way chute. Then somewhere around the 6th or 7th mile, 2 lights appeared behind us. They materialized in the rearview mirror so quietly that I didn't notice right away. Perfectly centered, perfectly steady. I pointed them out to the others, expecting to feel some small relief that at least one other person had been shoved down this detour with us. But the longer I watched those headlights, the stranger they felt. They never shifted, never dipped, never brightened. No matter how much I sped up or eased off the gas, they held the exact same distance, like the driver was matching me with machine-like precision. Haley whispered, "Why aren't they getting closer?" And the air inside the car tightened, the first hint that we'd wandered somewhere we weren't meant to be. I eased my foot onto the brake, thinking maybe the driver behind us would react, show some sign of being human, of paying attention, but their headlights didn't waver. Not even a tremble across the beams. The moment my speed dropped below 30, Haley told me she felt like the trees were leaning in closer, as if the road was squeezing us. Lucas suggested we pull a 3-point turn right there, narrow road or not. The idea sounded reckless, but something inside me pushed hard in that direction. I slowed enough to feel the wheels grip the rough pavement and started looking for even the smallest break in the shoulder, just a sliver of space to turn. We finally spotted a wider patch a little ahead, more a swollen concrete scar than a real turnout, and I steered toward it with the kind of focus you only get when your nerves are stretched thin. The second I angled the car to turn, the headlights behind us went out. Not faded, gone, as if someone flipped a switch. In the same moment, another set of lights appeared in front of us, far enough away that we couldn't see the vehicle at first. Just the faint outline of a bulky shape blocking the whole road. Whatever it wasn't moving. No rumble of an engine, no brake lights, no sign of life. I pulled the wheel hard to straighten us and rolled forward slowly, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. As we got closer, the outline sharpened into the boxy silhouette of a truck, a big one, the kind used for hauling equipment. But there were no plates, no company logos, nothing except a thick coat of matte paint that seemed to swallow what little light reached it. I rolled down my window a couple of inches, expecting to hear an engine idling or maybe someone shifting inside the cab. Instead, all we heard was the wind threading through the trees and the uneven ticking of our cooling engine. The truck sat dead still, angled just enough to block us completely. Lucas muttered something about getting out and talking to them, but the idea felt impossible. Nothing about the truck suggested. Driver stepped away for a moment. It looked staged, planted, like someone had dragged it there and left it intentionally, waiting for the exact moment we'd try to escape. Haley kept turning in her seat to look behind us, whispering that the other car couldn't have just vanished. When I finally put the car in reverse to back away, Haley gasped so sharply that it made my vision jolt. The headlights were back behind us, same distance as before, same eerie stillness. But now they weren't centered on the road. They were angled slightly, as if whoever was in that car wanted to block us too. We were boxed in, front and back, with nothing but a thin, unmarked strip of forest on either side. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight I could hear the faint creak of the leather as I told Lucas and Haley to lock their doors. My heartbeat felt loud enough to echo in the cabin, and for a second, none of us spoke. It hit us all at the same time. That detour sign wasn't there to help drivers. It was there to collect them. The only option left was the forest, but stepping out into that wall of trees felt like trading one danger for another. The branches on both sides pressed so close to the road that they formed a jagged barrier, like an uneven row of ribs. I kept the engine running, hoping maybe one of the vehicles would move, reveal some kind of logic behind all this. Instead, both sets of lights held their positions with that same unnatural precision. Lucas leaned toward the windshield, squinting as if he could make out a silhouette inside the truck ahead of us. "There's someone in there," he whispered, even though none of us could actually see anything. The idea alone was enough to make the air grow heavier. It meant someone had been watching us from the moment we turned off the highway. Haley's voice was barely above a breath when she suggested cutting through the trees on foot and trying to reach the main road again. The thought of leaving the car behind made my chest tighten, but staying felt worse. I opened the door slowly, half expecting the truck's lights to flare on or the car behind us to start creeping forward. Nothing moved. No engines, no footsteps. Just the hum of insects and a faint clicking sound coming from deep in the woods. Sharp, irregular, almost mechanical. We grabbed whatever we could carry fast. Haley's backpack, a flashlight, my phone, Lucas's pocket knife. The moment we stepped off the asphalt, the darkness between the trees swallowed us in a way headlights never could. The forest floor was uneven, packed with brambles that scratched at our legs as we pushed through. I kept glancing back, trying to catch a glimpse of the road through the branches, but it vanished behind layers of tangled limbs. At one point, we heard something move parallel to us. Slow, deliberate steps that weren't in sync with ours. Lucas raised his finger to his lips, and we all froze mid-stride, trying to listen past our own breathing. The steps stopped too. Then came the sound again, that clicking faster now as if reacting to our presence. Haley grabbed my arm, her grip like a clamp, and whispered that she saw something standing between two trees ahead. I didn't see it, but I believed her instantly. She described a tall figure, too still, its outline wrong somehow, like it was leaning at an angle that didn't match the slope of the ground. We kept moving, faster this time, pushing through branches that snapped back in our faces. The forest eventually thinned enough that we could see a faint glow through the trees. Artificial light, warm and steady. Relief rushed through us so suddenly I felt dizzy. We stumbled out onto a dirt driveway leading to a small house with a porch light flickering weakly. It looked lived in, not abandoned, and the sight of an actual structure after all that darkness felt unreal. Lucas walked ahead and knocked on the door with the side of his fist, calling out to whoever lived there. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. As we stood there, catching our breath and listening for any hint of movement inside, the porch light brightened for a moment, then dimmed until it was barely glowing, as if it was struggling to stay alive. Lucas tried the door handle gently, and to our surprise, it wasn't locked. The door swung inward just enough to reveal a narrow hallway lit by a single lamp placed on a small table. The lamp's shade was tilted at an odd angle, casting long diagonal shadows across the walls. Everything inside looked untouched, like someone had stepped out only minutes earlier. Shoes by the door, a jacket draped over a chair, a half-finished cup of coffee on the counter in the next room. But there was no sound, no voices, no TV hum, no footsteps, just that thick, unbroken quiet that instantly made us second-guess stepping inside. Haley whispered that it felt wrong to just barge in, but the woods behind us felt worse. We crossed the threshold together. The deeper we walked, the clearer it became that whoever lived there had left in a hurry. A drawer in the living room sat open, its contents scattered across the rug. A phone charger dangled halfway out of the wall, the outlet plate slightly cracked as if it had been yanked at an angle. On the kitchen table, a folded map lay open to a page marked with several circles made in red ink. When I pulled it closer, I saw that one of the circles matched the area we had driven into, the exact spot where the fake detour had led us. More circles spread outward in jagged, uneven loops, each marking other lonely patches of roads and forest routes. It looked like someone had been tracking incidents, or maybe planning them. A low vibration came from the hallway behind us, a deep rumble that made the floorboards tremble under our feet. Lucas stepped back toward the front window and peeked outside. His breath caught sharply as he told us the truck and the other car were now parked at the end of the driveway, side by side. Their lights were off, but their shapes were unmistakable. They hadn't followed us through the woods. There was no way. But they were here now, positioned as if they'd been waiting the whole time. I moved closer to the window, and that's when I saw movement near the tree line. Several figures, tall and rigid, standing between the branches. Their outlines were faint, almost blending with the shadows, but their heads were turned toward the house. Watching, waiting, we didn't stay long after that. Didn't stay long. The three of us bolted out the back door, sprinted across an open field behind the house, and didn't stop until we reached a service road with enough light to see the cracked pavement beneath our feet. A passing driver finally stopped when we flagged him down, and he drove us straight to the nearest town. We tried reporting what happened, but the sheriff's office brushed it off as kids messing around with fake signs. No investigation, no acknowledgement of the vehicles or the figures in the woods. A week later, when we went back with another friend during daylight, the detour sign was gone. The back road was sealed off with fresh gravel, and the house we'd found was boarded up like it had been abandoned for years. I don't know who set that trap or why, but I know we weren't the first ones they funneled in there, and I'm terrified to think we might not have been the last. Most evenings back then ended the same way for me, finishing a long shift at a warehouse on the outskirts of a quiet town, then taking the same stretch of highway back to the small rental house I shared with my cousin. My schedule was all over the place, so heading home close to midnight wasn't unusual. I remember that specific night clearly because I'd been feeling oddly alert, like my brain wouldn't shut off even though my body was exhausted. The highway was nearly empty, just a thin ribbon of pavement lit by my headlights, and the air felt heavy in that way it sometimes does before a storm. I kept the radio low, mostly just to have a voice in the car with me, something familiar to break up the long, dark road. The drive had always been uneventful, so when lights started flickering behind me, it took a second for it to register. At first, I wasn't even sure they were meant for me. They didn't look like the sharp red and blue flashes I'd seen on patrol cars before. These were more like someone rapidly turning a bright white spotlight on and off. I eased off the gas, checking the rear view a few times, trying to make out a silhouette or some kind of clear sign. The vehicle behind me stayed close, but not aggressively so, like whoever was driving wanted to seem official without actually showing anything that proved it. I figured maybe they were using some kind of auxiliary lights or had a malfunctioning bar. Instinct kicked in, and I signaled before pulling onto the gravel shoulder. Dust swirled up in small clouds as I rolled to a stop. My heart wasn't racing yet, but there was this slow, creeping tension in my chest, the kind that builds before your mind can explain why. The other vehicle stopped a few feet behind me, and for a moment, everything was silent, except for the faint hum of my engine. I kept both hands on the wheel out of habit, watching the side mirror. A figure stepped out, someone tall wearing a reflective vest that caught the headlights in sharp flashes, almost too bright to look at directly. The person walked up slowly, not hurried, not cautious, but measured in a way that felt unnatural for anyone responding to a traffic stop. There were no visible patches, no badge glinting in the light, no radio clipped anywhere, nothing that would reassure me. The vest looked generic, the kind you could buy from a hardware store. When they reached my window, they leaned down just enough for me to see the lower half of their face, clean-shaven, jaw tight, breathing steady like they'd practiced this. Before I could speak or reach for my documents, they tapped the glass twice with a gloved knuckle and said, "Go ahead and unlock your door." The tone wasn't official or polite. It was sharp, impatient, like they were waiting for me to make the wrong move. The moment those words hit me, something inside tightened. The same instinct you get when you step somewhere and realize the ground isn't stable. I didn't move right away, partly because my brain was still scrambling to understand what was happening, partly because the tone he used didn't fit anything I'd ever heard from an actual officer. He reached for the door handle without waiting for my response, fingers curling around it like he'd done it 100 times before. I saw the glint of something metallic on his wrist. Not a badge, just a cheap watch with a cracked face, and the way the reflective vest hung loose on him, like it wasn't his size. That detail stuck with me for reasons I didn't fully grasp in the moment. I kept my foot ready near the pedal, but I didn't dare move too fast. He tugged at the handle, but the door stayed locked. That seemed to irritate him. He leaned closer, angling his head like he was trying to see further into my car. The beam from his flashlight slid across my dashboard, then up toward my face, lingering a second too long. "Unlock it," he said again, lower this time, like he was trying not to lose his temper. There was no explanation, no mention of why he'd stopped me, nothing about a violation or even a request for identification. Just that command. A real officer would have asked me to roll the window down, not go straight for the door. And that's when a realization settled in, not sudden but heavy, spreading through my thoughts like cold water. My voice came out steadier than I expected when I asked, "Can I see your identification?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he straightened up slightly and lifted the flashlight so the beam pointed away from my eyes, revealing more of his face. His expression wasn't calm or neutral. It was tight, focused, like he was evaluating how difficult I would be to control. His lips pressed together, and then he let out a short exhale through his nose. "Don't make this harder," he said, and the way he said it made every muscle in my body go rigid. That wasn't a request, and it wasn't a warning. It sounded like a script he'd used before. When he tried the handle again, harder this time, I knew I had only seconds. The shoulder of the highway was empty in both directions. No traffic in sight, no lights except our two vehicles. If I got out or let him in, the night would swallow me before anyone noticed. My pulse thudded in my ears as I weighed my options. The stranger shifted his stance, bracing one hand on the roof of my car like he was preparing to yank the door open by force. I could hear the gravel crunching under his boots, each small movement sharp and deliberate. That sound, oddly enough, became the final push I needed to act. I slammed my foot on the gas before he could react, tires spitting gravel as the car lurched forward. The sudden movement threw him off balance. I caught a glimpse of him stumbling back in my side mirror, one arm raised like he was about to shout something. The moment the wheels hit pavement again, I pushed the accelerator harder than I ever had. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles felt stiff, but all I could think was distance. I needed as much distance between me and that man as possible. The white flickering lights behind me vanished fast, swallowed by the darkness as the road opened ahead. For a few seconds I drove without breathing, waiting for the nightmare to reappear in my rear view. A mile or two down, I spotted an exit for a small gas station that stayed open late, the kind with a flickering sign and old vending machines outside. I pulled in, parking right under the brightest lamp I could find, and kept the engine running. The place wasn't crowded, but there were at least a few people inside, and that alone brought a wave of relief. As I sat there trying to steady myself, I kept replaying the details. The generic vest, the lack of markings, the way he went straight for the door. None of it matched any real traffic stop protocol. Whoever he wasn't out there to write a citation. He had approached me with purpose, and that purpose sure wasn't legal. After a minute, I forced myself to walk inside. The clerk looked around my age and had earbuds in, completely oblivious to how rattled I must have seemed. But just being around other people grounded me. I told him someone pretending to be law enforcement had tried to pull me over, and his expression changed fast. He glanced toward the windows like he expected to see someone waiting outside. "That's been happening a few towns over," he said quietly. "People getting flagged down on empty stretches. Cops are warning folks not to stop unless they see proper markings." Hearing that didn't comfort me. It confirmed exactly what I feared. This wasn't random. Someone was using the darkness and isolation to pick targets. I waited at the station until another customer, a middle-aged woman, was heading out, and I asked if I could follow her car back toward town. She didn't hesitate to say yes. Driving behind her, both of us sticking to well-lit areas, felt like moving through a different world than the one I'd escaped earlier. When I finally reached home and locked the door behind me, the weight of what could have happened hit all at once. I reported the incident the next morning. They took the statement seriously, but no one ever followed up with an arrest or a suspect. To this day, the most unsettling part is realizing how carefully that man had chosen his spot and his moment. A stretch of road where a uniform was only a suggestion and help was nearly impossible to reach. I still take that highway sometimes, but I never pull over for anyone unless I see a marked car and official lights. And even then, I always keep the doors locked until I'm absolutely sure who's standing outside.